Welcome to episode 97 of Coast to Coast AFL Podcast Music and Blades. I'm Blaze, your host. We're both very sorry that there was no episode last week. We ran out of time. A lot of other things happened. I'm still up in Brisbane. I had zero energy whatsoever. But we're here now, and we've got a lot to cover. There is a lot to talk about. So let's just jump straight into it. How are you doing, Mr. Syric?
Not too bad, not too bad. Like yourself, I am still sort of recovering from the trip. I'm pretty fine now, but I always have a bit of energy sap afterwards. But yeah, it was a very good trip. Met with my friend Tiffy. Also met with my friend Blaze. I don't know if you know him. Good to catch him for a day. And yeah, as I said, got to explore a bit of Brisbane, which I'd never seen before. Absolutely beautiful place. I love the rainforesty areas in the city. And honestly, it was probably one of my favorite like solo traveling trips. For all that in terms of like being able to go to places on your own, travel around. Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. So yeah, happy to be home. Happy to be doing the podcast again. Apologies for last week. It's probably a bit my fault more than Blazers, but as I said, we'll cover anything that happened in round zero as it came. So
Yes.
yeah, as I said, really good. How
Yes.
about yourself?
My side of the trip was really good. Again, it was very coincidental that you and I were both up there at the exact same time. But it was good to hang out. I was up there with my brother for Lincoln Park, the start of their Australian tour. So we saw both Brisbane shows. We went to both Melbourne shows when they came down here. I also got to catch up with some other friends that live up in Brisbane, which was a very good time for me. I love going to Brisbane. I somehow end up there like once a year at minimum. It's probably my second favorite city in the country, outside of Melbourne, of course. Sorry, Perth, you're third.
It's pretty high for Perth, to be honest.
If I'm gonna have to pick an order, it'll be Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, Sydney. I say
Fair
that because
enough.
I've only been to Sydney once, and I'm not really a
Yeah.
fan of going back.
Yeah, I would probably rate. I don't know. Adelaide's a bit weird, but so is Perth.
This is
Depends
true.
how far you call the city.
Very true.
Anyway,
But yeah, this weekend as well was also very good. If you've caught up at all at any, had a look at any of my socials, mostly my Instagram. TGX was this weekend, the Game Expo. Myself and the HSP crew ran the PC zone on both days. We had our Marvel Rivals event, our Creator and Pro Invitational on Saturday. We worked with a bunch of really, really awesome creators. Some more well popular ones like Loserfruit and Creator, for examples. And then on the Sunday, we ran an Apex tournament. There were a bunch of creators involved in that one, as well as just, I think, some regular players as well. And then we had a regular 6v6 Marvel Rivals tournament, which involved just a lot of the really good players in the OCE scene. And then at the end, we managed to squeeze in a little show match, which involves some of the voice actors for the Marvel Rivals game, which was a lot of fun. We got to work with Psylocke's voice actor, the Winter Soldier voice actor, and Namor's voice actor, which was all very, very exciting. So we're glad we were able to put that together. Hope everyone who happened to see any of what we did had a great TGX. If you're listening to this, of course. And hopefully you're now settled in to listen to us ramble about the footy for however long we've got.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, the final thing I want to talk about, if I was still on the preamble, is I did manage to actually go to a couple of games, one football, one NRL, when I was over in Sydney. So I did see, and we'll talk about a little bit more, the Gold Coast versus Geelong game. I was trying to go to Brisbane versus Western Bulldogs, but I did a bit of a mess up in ticketing. Obviously, round one isn't the same as round zero, but in my head, I thought all the early tickets would be released at the same time. They weren't. So, luckily for me, the Gold Coast constituency don't sell out their game. So I was able to get a fairly good seat for me and my friend Tiffy. We enjoyed it. I will just say, Metroconf Stadium, it is pretty solid. Apart from being a bit out of the way to get to, but yeah, it's a bit of a trip from Brisbane. You're much easier to get there from the Gold Coast, but as I said, it's a very easy stadium to get in and out of in terms of finding your seat as well. It's pretty much a no bad view stadium. and very colourful as well. It's actually probably more so on the outside. It's probably one of the most cheerful stadiums, if you will. And then the other thing is, I actually went down to the NRL too. I saw the Dolphins versus the Rabbitohs. I was very impressed by the amount of paraphernalia that the Dolphins were chucking out. I also got myself a fin too, so I am pretty much self-supporting the Brisbane Dolphins for now. They lost the game against the Rabbitohs.
Standard.
But you know, um, as I said, it was a very enjoyable time. Unfortunately, I was there on my own. My friend, her kid got sick, spread to the family. So I didn't get a meter after that. But as I said, really, really happy with both stadiums experiences, and yeah,
That's good. I'm very glad you got to do a little bit more sport exploration as well as just regular
yeah,
exploration.
exactly.
It is a good Brisbane is
Yeah.
a good city for that, especially because they've got the Olympics coming up in a couple of years as well, so they're very
Mm,
much getting set for a massive, massive sporting event for them.
yeah. There's also a squash tournament in one of the central places near their museums and all that. So I imagine they're also using that as a testing ground for the Olympics. But yeah, as I said, didn't get to see any of that, but it was very there's a lot of grunting and groaning going on
I can imagine.
because
I
it
can
was sort of
imagine.
like an outdoor stadium. So yeah. But shall we get into the main sport? What we all want? The AFL football.
Yes. So we will touch on round zero shenanigans as and when they come for the related teams. Obviously, it being Thursday night starts and round one, the traditional round one start will obviously be, I'll transition to that now, Carlton and Richmond. So we'll, like, as we go, we will mention rounds, anything round zero related. For just an extended note, when we get to something like Brisbane, we will mention their suspensions that happened last week as well to Zach Bailey, Dusty Gardner, and Harris Andrews. So that will all be touched on in more depth. But that's just a beginning note. But yes, at Thursday night, the traditional round one opener should still be the season opener, but round zero exists. Carlton and Richmond at the MCG. I think it was like 85 to 90,000 people there. Sadly, I was not there because I had to work. But with a 4-point margin, the Blues won 10-15-75 to 9-17-71.
Yeah, so we'll take it back one round to round zero. Carlton coming into this game played Sydney, were semi-competitive actually no, they were fairly competitive for the first half. It was a very tight scoring 18-22 game until as we all know, these ones kicked 12-3 to 4-2 in the fourth quarter, absolutely blew them out. And we sit there wondering, it's like, Carlton, yeah, is their defense going to stand up this year? Do they have enough firing power? They're just all sorts of questions going into this night. And it's hard to say whether any of them were actually answered. The Blues did win. You did see this game on replay, did you? Or
Yes, I did see a bit of this game on replay, thankfully. I was
yeah,
I was
it
very
would have.
impressed with a lot of our ball movement, and we'll touch on this when we go down in the dot points.
Yeah,
But
I
the
think
forward line, there's a lot
yeah.
going on there.
Yeah, so that was like a big problem. And it's one of those things where it really made up. Oh, sorry. Carlton's defense, which was, I still think, pretty awful, was bailed out by some pretty bad, pretty bad shot conversion. Because Brisbane, as you mentioned, Richmond were moving the ball fairly easy. They were 31% moving the ball from D50 to forward 50, and good 22% to score from it. But as I said, that 9-17, it just really hurt. And especially since, unlike last year, we actually saw a fair bit of supply going to players like, the main two culprits being Jonty Fall and Tom Lynch, but they just weren't able to convert at all. Tom Lynch finishing with a woeful 2-7, and
If
some
he
of
had,
those were fairly easy
if he
shots.
had just kicked one more goal, we would have won.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing. That's the sort of mental game that like full forwards or players that are meant to be like your big designated goal kickers. Like that's the sort of
Yes.
like the mental fortitude that you got to have. Because if you miss those shots and like one of those shots desperately matters to win a game, like that does end up playing on you for a while.
Yeah, and there was also a couple of times because he also gave away 5 free kicks as well. And I think I've sort of mentioned in our Discord chat, but it is really weird to remember that Tom Lynch used to be a captain because he just doesn't quite have
He
leadership qualities,
he's a lot
in
more
my opinion, at
hot
least
headed.
on
It
field.
feels like.
Yeah, I really can't speak for him off the field. Maybe he's like really good at bringing units together, but yeah, it's just a bit. Unfortunately, like if you were to choose someone to have around after your postseason, post premiership success, it really would have rather have been Rewalt than Tom Lynch. But yeah, as I said, it's just one of those things where, I think it really stuck out from a sore thumb that Richmond, unlike several times last year, had the ability to put out a 4-quarter game, which is really good to see in round one. But yeah, they just couldn't finish it off, and this is really a game that went begging for them.
Yeah, no, as I mentioned at the beginning, like I was very impressed from what I saw of our ball movement, especially our movement out of defense. I thought that looked very solid. I'm very impressed with how our backline has restructured, especially
Mm,
since we gained Gibcus back. And alas, losing Young down the back there, like having Gibcus back definitely helps. Obviously, like we've got Banksy has is a lot more comfortable in the backline now. We've got Hugo Ralphsmith back in as well. Sadly, without the mullet, he cut it all off. I'm very sad about that. Um,
yeah,
Jaden Short
quite a shame.
looks to be a
Could
lot
be a
better this
Samson
year as well.
situation.
Yeah, exactly, could be. Shorty looks a lot better. I know we're still missing Vlosten. He'll come back in due
Mm,
time, which isn't too bad. But I'm very, very impressed with how we held up. Um, in terms of at least our ball movement. Obviously, playing one on ones, they're still quite young down the back there, in some aspects. So matching up against Carlton's very different forward line was always going to be a little bit of a hassle for
yeah,
us. Um, but the defense is still quite impressive. The midfield battle, that was very interesting. The Lawler versus Jagger Smith lineup, it's a very interesting fight to see. The number one, number two draft picks going at it. But can't complain too much about that.
yeah, exactly. And I think, as I said, while Richmond definitely were beaten in the clearances and all that, I do think like around the general contest that they were a lot better. It is still like a fine balance because obviously there's still a feeling that Richmond might just give up a bit too much, which allows easy goals from stoppages and scoring. But again, like we're still at a stage where Richmond where we're talking about things you can fix right now and things that are still going to develop in a few years. And do you think that like that stoppage work, Carlton kicking 4-10 from stoppages compared to Richmond's 1-2, it'll come. But I think overall, I think this more even contribution from players, if they can build that up for the next few games, I think they're going to be a lot better off. But
Yeah,
yeah,
round one is
Carlton though,
always, round one, round two,
yeah.
round three, they're always like very, very early rounds where you only get a brief feel of what kind of trajectory the teams are going to go. And it's not until we hit like the mid
Yeah.
season when things will hit their
And we're
stride.
going to talk about this a bit later. It just seems like defense is at a really low point. And there's been some very high scoring contests, which I don't know. It like to me, it just doesn't feel natural. I don't think it's actually added too much to the general excitement. Like we've had, I mean, this was a close game. I can't really say that this is like one of the premier contests you could watch back. Obviously, last week you had that Brisbane versus Western Bulldog Classic, and there's going to be a couple this week that were really solid games. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this was just like your arm wrestle. I think due to some of these, this probably turned like a 50 to 58 contest into like a 75 to 71.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, it was definitely one where the fans could watch it, and Carlton fans will be happy that they won. Probably unhappy with some of their pains that are still going on for this team. Again, winning the bowl and just not quite doing enough with it. But yeah, Richmond still, yeah, I think they just take a bit from it. But I think the most disappointing thing is like Richmond, they've only got a few chances this year, probably, that they're going to be in prime positions to win games, and they just let slip a bit.
Yeah, this one was definitely, whilst, for Carlton, it was probably a life-saving kind of win, in terms of,
Mm.
their
Oh,
coach.
yeah, we could have had a round one coach firing if
Oh,
Carlton
yeah.
lost, I reckon. That was,
It could have been
yeah.
downhill so fast. Um, but yeah, this was definitely one that we kind of let slip. And then with Jonty Fall, getting suspended for one match, it means we won't see him next week against Gold Coast.
Mm.
Um, which I imagine that we're probably not going to win that one anyway, unlike last year. I think teams are in much different positions now than what they were last year. So that one will be interesting to see, but we'll talk about that later. Um,
Yeah.
anything
The
else we
last
need
thing I do
to?
want to talk about
Yes.
is just because, it's been a couple of weeks and we're not sort of running down our player stats like we usually did. I do want to give a shout out to Elijah Hollands. Who's had like a pretty good couple of weeks for a player that was almost cut out of the tide. Probably doing better than his brother at the moment. He's playing a awkward halfback role. He's found a bit of time and space on the wing, so considering not much love is going Carlton's way, even though they're 1-1, like it's not the worst place to be.
Yeah.
I think he deserves a bit of shout out. Also good to see Harry Dean on the park. Thought he was a bit variable. First week was a lot better than his second, but yeah, no, it's good to see some of the young players come through for Carlton as
Yeah,
well.
I think Carlton does have a lot of really positive players coming through their system right now. Especially in this game, a lot of them stood out quite well. But it'll just be how they match up against tougher opponents as to whether the system that they're building for this year is going to sustain.
Yeah, as I said, it hasn't sold me on the fact that Carlton have a strong enough core to be anything more than lower the ladder fodder, but they're not the only team. As we head on to the Friday night game.
Yes, and with this one, we begged the AFL to not give this team any more primetime slots. Unfortunately, they didn't listen because they were facing up against an old
Ugh.
rival in round one, and that is Essendon and Hawthorn. So with a 62-point margin at the MCG, Hawthorn won out 21-19, 145 to 13-5, 83.
Yes, and I mean, the only positive side was that, at least for a tiny bit, Essendon were able to keep up with the Hawks, who, coming off a pretty rough week last week. It seems ages ago, but the Giants really dominated them. Their midfield looked really weak. They let Stringer just do what he want, and as I said, they looked not unsalvageable, but it definitely was a lower performance than we would sort of expect for the Hawthorn, with a good coach coming out round one, who were fairly consistent last year. But as I said, they were able to rebound a fair bit. It's just sort of blitzed them, really, and made it harder for the Dons to win the ball. Didn't do well. They were efficient in terms of their actual goal kicking. On the field efficiency wasn't too good for Essendon, but yeah, I think this is just a case where Essendon were pretty overwhelmed, and it happened pretty much right after the second quarter.
Yeah, it's kind of standard of Hawthorn to start a little bit slow, um, and kind of let teams in, give them a bit of a spark, and then just put their foot immediately down. However, I genuinely think that Essendon just slightly had a better matchup, to start this game off. Like I think they managed to kind of align themselves against like the right sort of opponents, like the matchups, like the one-to-one matchups for the most part. I think were actually quite even. But it wasn't until, Sam Mitchell flicked the magnets around, he found a way through, as he normally does, and they just put the foot down and just started blitzing through goals.
Yeah, and I guess it's also the two. It's like, for a little while, because again, Essendon are not the best clearance team. I mean, I mean, I think the clearances are actually pretty even for the end of this. Oh, no, they weren't, 28-41. But you know what I mean? I think it was just like the sheer numbers as well.
Hmm.
Like, as you mentioned, like they probably did match up fairly well to start with. I wasn't quite home to see the exact start of this game when I was watching. It started to blow out. But you could sort of tell that, Hawthorn, it was more like, just chipping away. As you mentioned, there was probably like some smaller moves, some important matchups. Talking about individuals, Ned Reeves. We're talking about Lloyd Meek a bit quiet this week. Last week, this week he played a bit more of a supporting role, and Ned Reeves, who pretty much we've all forgotten about, son of the CEO of Hawthorn, I think it is. He just comes in and has a really important game, kicks 2 goals, 100% accurate, 100% efficiency for his, was it 13 disposals, 17 hitouts. Absolutely fantastic game. But yeah, as I said, they were just out-muscled. And I think Essendon, unfortunately, when you look at their list, they just had too many small influence players. And, obviously you'd expect that a bit, but, players like Carl Langford, Peter Wright being a bit quiet, really doesn't help their cause, when they already had such a mixed bag. They obviously did have some bright sides. I think the couple of debutants in Dyson Sharp and Max Kodogianis did pretty well. And, some of the players from last year, like Lockie Blackiston, did fairly well. But, it was just... Yeah, as I said, it very quickly went away, and if it wasn't for some of the efficiency when they did actually get it forward, this could have been a much bigger blowout.
I just want to take a quick look because I'm very interested. I want to know what the hitouts were between the rocks because
It wasn't close, I don't think. Hitouts 25-43. I don't think it was the worst blowout,
okay,
but
so Lloyd Meek got 26 hitouts, 6 to advantage. Ned Reeves was 17 hitouts, 6 to advantage. Blackiston got 19 hitouts, 4 to advantage, and Peter Wright, when I guess doing hitouts in the forward line maybe, got 6 hitouts and 1 to advantage. So honestly, not too bad, all things considered.
Yeah, I think it was actually more of a case of Hawthorn doing well because like Essendon still got 25 hitouts. It was far from the worst, which we had a surprising case of the worst. If you haven't seen the stats, you'll be pretty surprised to see who it is down the bottom there. But yeah, as I said, they just didn't really make too much from their centre ball chains.
No, but that's
Was
kind
it
of
Essendon?
expected.
Yeah, actually,
Considering
it's not too bad. They still scored 33 points from stoppages. It was just Hawthorn's got 6-10, 46. A bit more accurate, and that, it's still like 16 scoring shots to 8.
Hawthorn
So,
were also doing a lot more with loose ball, with rebounds. Like they were getting the ball from all over the shop.
yeah, exactly. Like it was pretty unimpeded. In fact, we were talking about the other D50 to forward 50. That's right. This was ridiculous. Their D50 to forward 50 was going at 42.9%. The chance of them to take the ball from the back after the forward half. And if you just look at defensive half, it's 52%, which is by far the highest for the week. The Essendon's credit, they did minorly prevent the scoring from happening from those areas, considering how positive it was. But yeah, as I said, Hawthorn were the most efficient halfback team by far this round.
Even though the game was a 62-point deficit, like it was still technically a high scoring game. Like Essendon got over 80 points.
Yeah.
Which
it was. It's a bit junk timey. As I said, I definitely think Essendon in the first half is where you would get most of your lessons from, I guess. But as I said, I just think with it being so hard to defend, I don't really think like getting 5 or 4 goals in the last quarter is that, it doesn't really curb how just porous they were, really. again, you're not really expecting Essendon to compete against the good teams, but it's just all about finding ways to stop them. And I think that's where some of the lower teams are going to struggle for the first half of the season because, as we've been seeing, um, it's very hard to stop offensive momentum when it happens. And these are even for good teams. And then you've got like a backline of what Essendon's is. And yeah, as I said, there's not really much to do. I think coaches need a bit more time to figure it out. But yeah, as I said, team like Essendon, you're not really giving them much of a chance to stop Hawthorn on a roll,
Yeah, that's
especially
exactly
with
right.
69 inside 50s.
Yeah, especially when your backline isn't exactly one of the best in the league. Like you're never going to be able to defensively hold Hawthorn's rampage because they're just so fast. They're so clean with their hands. Like it's going to be impossible to stop if you're not prepared.
Yeah, and I guess that's also, the thing is like, yeah, I guess it's still the disappointing thing about Ben Mackay, who really hasn't. Um, we're talking about Lynch not being a leader for the Richmond forward line. I think Ben Mackay is almost the same way in the back line. As I said, he does good defensive efforts, but like I don't know, I really think like the really good leaders are able to like get your worst defenders, or at least on paper, are playing above their talent. And I just don't think that happens enough with Essendon's defense. There's like moments of resistance, and then it just gets battered fairly easily.
Yeah. Um. Is there anything else you want to briefly cover before we move on?
Nah, except for like, as I said, it's just disappointing, like how we finally get footy back. Round zero the way it is, and like the opening two games, it's just really bad scheduling. Like these are the games that are guaranteed free to wear. It's just such a waste. You know, it's like you don't get any Saturday night games because Fox has got that.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on your state, is whether you get some of the earlier games, and some of those are going to be delayed. It's just like I don't know. I just think it's really bad for the growth of the game. I don't know how you feel, but I definitely feel like this season's can't come off with a bit of a whimper, and I think some of these like smaller things are adding to that. Um, this game being one of them, just being so obviously lackluster to start the season.
Agreed.
Oh, sorry, heading in that this is going to be a lackluster game. Um, and yeah, as I said, I can't really see many people keeping it on the TV after halftime. I switched it over to see the Matildas play. Um, that was a good game.
That's what we want out of Achilles. No, in terms of
Yeah.
the AFL schedule, I completely agree. However, in saying that, this did kind of get a little bit swept under the radar, and we won't touch about it. We're likely not going to touch it in depth this week. But there is a new VFL broadcasting agreement with Channel 7, KO, um, Fox Footy, and SEN, I think, in terms of radio broadcasts, that they're gonna basically split up because Channel 7 initially dropped out of broadcasting the VFL in its entirety. But they've come into an agreement with a bunch of other broadcasters to be able to bring the VFL to wider audiences, essentially, and continue to keep basically the second division of the AFL alive, because that's
Yeah.
pretty much where I guess the B side of the scene is growing. So whilst the AFL scheduling might be a little bit scuffed, I'm glad that the VFL scheduling, especially with Tasmania now being in the league, which is very, very exciting. Their first official games, I believe, start this week. I think round one were practice match games still. Um, it's going to be very exciting to see how their season plays out, and I'm definitely going to be keeping a close eye on that, as well as I know Snap will also be keeping an eye on that as well. He's a big fan of what Tassie is doing, so I think it'll be really good for the scene to have them grow as well as the VFL as a whole, and hopefully that'll eventually lead to better outcomes in the AFL.
Yeah, exactly. Like the best way to start a team is to grow them up through the grassroots. Even I think both Gold Coast and GWS spent a year in the developmentals, didn't they? I think at least one of them did.
I cannot
Um,
remember. I think it might have been
yeah, it's got
GWS,
a while
but I
ago.
can't remember. And it's been a while.
Yeah. But yeah, as I said, it's a lot better for building up cohesion.
It is. It is.
Um, but yeah, shall we move on to what is the hottest team in football? Not even preseason guff, early prediction knee jerk. Like it's very
Yes.
easy to make this claim.
Yes. We will jump over from one rivalry to another. These teams constantly have a chip on their shoulder for against each other. It's always either some kind of bloodbath or some kind of close game. A lot of mini fights tend to happen during this game because they just hate each other as rivals. Even though it feels like it feels like a manufactured rivalry. I think the rivalry between these two teams is extremely legitimate now, and that is the Bulldogs
Yeah.
and the Giants. Saturday afternoon game at Marvel Stadium, and with an 81-point margin, the Dogs win out 21-8, 134 to 7-11-53.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this game a bit first because I think when we're talking about how good the Bulldogs are, we will talk about their victory against the Lions at the Gabba last week. But against GWS, it was oh, this game really should have been closer. Like it's hard to say that about an 81-point margin, but there was actually a fair bit of control just not being converted for the Giants. The Dogs only had 5 more inside 50s than GWS, but as I said, 60-point differential from scores from stoppage, and it was just the Giants midfield getting whacked. And when they were able to work it from the outside, they weren't able to penetrate that well. I think most of their forwards had a really bad day, to be fair, and it was just very un-Giants like. Normally it's a supply issue that's the Giants' problem, but they actually managed to get a bit of supply, and against what we were calling, still one of the worst defenses in football, and they just couldn't do it. They weren't lockdown studs, but they're now heading towards bend don't break territory with the performances of Lobb, Karma, Selwood, Jakes, and Butterick. Like, how much has this Bulldogs defense changed by just a couple of young inclusions?
It's
Obviously being Selwood and Butterick.
Yeah, it's so interesting to look at
Jake,
because
sorry.
last year we were talking about how the Dogs have done some fantastic recruitment and building for their midfield and their forward line. Like they are two of the most elite side, I guess
Hmm.
divisions, groups, I don't know, areas of the game
Area, yeah.
in the league. But their defense was always like so much further down the list. But now that we've kind of
Hmm.
seen it a little bit more in action against the team that we know is is fairly good, even if they are still developing in certain areas, like it looks so much cleaner, it looks so much better. Again, Lob moving down into the backline only a couple of years ago, it looks
Mhm.
so much more solid as time has gone on. Bringing over Butterick from the Suns is huge. Buku Karmas finally coming into his own as a little bit more, as like a proper defender, a little bit less of a flexible
Hmm.
player. I think keeping him in defense is a brilliant idea. And then bringing in these other newer players, and it just looks so much more solid.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing because I think like a lot of it changes just by some of the small things being fixed out. Because again, I don't actually still think that this is like a great defense. Like when you were even watching it, you saw times where the Bulldogs players were losing it a bit. I think 1-on-1 they're not quite as accountable as some other teams, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just the small things. And I think the biggest thing for me is rebounding off halfback. Like to me, that's night and day. And because they're able to rebound like a tiny bit better, it's resulting in a lot more score because we know how good they are when they go to the top. And I think they are like the highest scoring team from defensive half. Obviously, some people playing one game, some people playing two. It's hard to say, but definitely just by their scoring, it's hard to not claim that they'll be one of the best when everything's all said and done. And as I said, and also, even what you say, like Buku Kampas, who I still don't think is like the best one-on-one defender, but when Lob, Selwood, and Jakes do their job a bit more, he's allowed to play a bit more aggressive. Yeah, it's you don't want to compare them because they're looking, similar, but like Karmas definitely does play that Mac Andrews where his defensive liabilities is just made up for his athleticism getting more intercepts. So as I said, it means that again, you work into that, and you become a Gold Coast style defense. Like, you maybe not have a Sam Collins down there, but you do have that aggressive halfback rebound that's able to get early intercepts into forward line scoring.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see that like the Giants' defense just didn't really hold up as well as we would expect. Like we've been touting like for so long that they have some of the
Mm.
best defensive players. Again, they've been all Australian. But they just felt like they couldn't do anything against this rampaging forward line.
Well, yeah, and I guess it's, sort of come to it. It's like, yeah, in past years, like, I feel like Giants would have had some ways to lock down some of Bulldogs' momentum. Like Bontempelli, absolutely fantastic game. And normally they have like a player, it used to be players like Perryman, the one that went to Adelaide, the other one. What's his name?
Um,
Uh,
no, I don't know.
yeah, you know who we're talking about at home. Um, but yeah, like they just
Wait, for the
really don't
Giants?
have any. Yeah, Giants went to Adelaide last year.
Oh, it's Peatling.
Peatling, thank you. Um, yeah, or even back in the day, like plays like Steele and all that, but they just don't have that anymore. Um, and for the last 2 years, they haven't been defensive teams. Like they can hold movement. They didn't do it today, but like I think we've seen Giants game where they're able to just grind the game to a whole play control style play, but that's not the same as pure defending. And in terms of pure defending, not that we've seen much of that this year, but it's definitely not an advantage for the Giants from what we've seen. Even against Hawthorn, it's not like they were locking him down. Hawthorn still scored a fair bit. It was more of their middle of the ground work forward
Mm.
that was impressive in that game. But as I said, it's just so not what you attribute to the Giants normally. They've still got that core, they've still got that back half movement, and they've still got that forward line which they're developing. But yeah, as I said, it's a really big switch up, and it's a bit of a culture shock, especially considering what we know about them.
Yeah, the big sound definitely is not playing in the west of the town this week. And with the way the scheduling's going, I might not play for a little bit longer. It's they've got a
Yeah, Giants have a tough
very
draw.
interesting lineup going into the start of the season. Um, but yeah, it's also really interesting just on the dog side of things that like even if like you bring in some players that don't have that much like AFL level experience, like they've only played a
Hmm.
handful of games. If you throw them into a team that like can really allow their what the skills that they're learning like shine,
Yeah,
somehow it works out pretty well, and I think that's exactly what the Dogs did for their defense.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, and granted, we're talking about all this like as if like Aaron Norton didn't kick 6 goals and like Marcus Bolland-Belly didn't have lights out, absolutely
Oh yeah, we'll
fantastic
just
game.
take out those two players just for note.
No, well, we're not taking them out, but you know what I mean. It's like we've seen those two players fire and them still come up short, especially in those closer games. But as I said, it's just that rounding them off enough, where as I said, because as I said, like you don't need much for the Bulldogs to just mount overwhelming offense from just high quality players. And yeah, they're starting to find that a bit more. And obviously, we talk about last week, which was absolutely fantastic. That win up in the Gabba. Probably like a bit lucky in terms of like Brisbane bottling it in the last quarter,
Mm-hmm.
goal kicking. But as I said, it was just so even. You could tell that they'd taken steps to sort of round out their team a bit more. And yeah, as I said, like that was, again, I would still say that's the best game of football this year so far, that Brisbane Bulldogs game. There's one other contender, um, you know, oh, maybe not contender, but another solid game that we'll bring up in a moment. But yeah, as I said, it's so good to see because as I said, we've been talking about the Bulldogs in terms of being wasted potential, and it was like way too easy in the season to predict.
Mm-hmm.
But like last year, we were already talking about players like James Harms off halfback turning the ball over and all those sort of things. O'Donnell being a bit raw, but now we're talking about positives to start with, and it's not just on the offensive side of things. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a huge credit to them to try and make this year being okay. We're going to work off what was already working, but we are doing the smaller things to round off this list.
Yes, I do also want to just briefly shout out some defensive efforts from the Dogs midfield players slash forward players as well, like Riley West, Matt
Hmm.
Kennedy, like the players
Oh yeah.
that are younger or that have been brought in from other clubs, and they elevated their game, and it just continues to show that even with the older players on these lists, they have a really really solid group of players coming through as well that are just I won't say elite, but they're like next to elite. They're very much getting there in terms of how talented they are in this scene.
Yeah, and it's like even a player like Riley West, like Bulldogs weren't like I said, it's hard to say when you have Big Sam Darcy in the forward line, but like yeah, it was Darcy and Norton, but they were like fairly held accountable, but like they still played fairly tall on Riley West, and he really had to work hard to make his efforts, and he didn't hit the scoreboard directly, but he set up a fair few plays, and when you've got your third player, you know, I think that's always a good sign when you've got a forward that it isn't quite working for him. Like they're scoring a bunch, but he isn't getting the direct goals. Him to still really work hard to contribute because he knows it's going to benefit other players is just sign of a really good forward structure. So I really appreciate you pointing out Riley West for that.
Yeah, I think
Sam
he's.
Davidson
Oh
is
yes,
also
yes.
another player that just, he's just come in, hasn't had the most game time ever, but he keeps on popping up in important moments for them. So, yeah, they've got a lot of good youngsters coming through. Like I said, this is not just going to be, the Western Bulldogs relying on a fair few, top end talents. This is starting to see the completeness of this side.
They're a lot more well
Oscar
rounded.
Baker on his 50th too,
Yeah, true.
I haven't even mentioned that. Like a couple of goals, a lot more effort than we've seen from Oscar Baker. Who can sort of really float in and out of matches, but that was just a very solid performing game too.
And then just on the MRO, real quick, there was one player of note in the MRO reports. That is Harvey Thomas being fined $3,000, $2,000 with an early plea, for striking Matt Kennedy in the first quarter. Nothing super massive of note. The big one I note will come later on in the episode. But for now, we will jump over to another rivalry that is more ground location based than team based. I'm going to say this is the one team that actually has a good track record of beating this team at this ground. Unfortunately, they didn't do it this time around, but it is Geelong and Fremantle down at GMHBA, of course, and with a 10-point margin. The Cats won out 16-14 110 to 14-16 100.
Yes, and this one we'll take it last week. We won't talk about it too much because it was an absolute flogging. But as I said, adding the Suns game last time where it was 9-11, 125 to 69, really the Cats have had up to halftime 5 absolutely terrible defensive performance, scoring 8-4 in the first quarter,
Mm-hmm.
up to 11-8, 74 at halftime. Sure, they were starting to score a bit more. They got 8-4 themselves, but what we saw was super concerning for the Cats. It was absolute alarm bells. They Freo absolutely hunted down some very sloppy disposals, able to get it sent in their forward half with the back line for Geelong in disarray. I don't think I've seen a team set up worse from turnover than Geelong did in that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Jackson was really great. Hayden Young played with style. Sarong having an absolute monster, and it looked like Freo had the game on lockdown. Like, I think like it's really weird because like it's even at halftime, I felt like Geelong could come back, but it was still concerning nevertheless, like how it actually got the game to this point.
Yeah, it's very interesting that Geelong have kind of just lost a lot of their like secondary efforts in a lot of situations. Like it just feels like they
Yeah.
weren't as as aggressive in getting back the ball than they normally would be in even just in last year. It just feels like they've lost a lot of that effort. Whilst in the second half, it did feel like that part of that was starting to come back, but in those 5 quarters from
Mm.
last week to this week, it just looked like that none of what they had worked on in previous years was there anymore. It was really weird.
Yeah, and I will give a shout out to Sean Manor because if it wasn't for his effort getting those 3 goals by halftime, like Geelong they would have been in a lot worse. Like they had an inch of belief just
Hmm.
because they had scored 8-5 or 8-1 or whatever it was up in that point. Um, but yeah, as I said, the second half came around and it just looked like a completely different Geelong side. The disposal cleaned up a lot. Shannon Neal started to get into the game. Talking about, teams struggling defensively. Fremantle probably missing the impact of the decision not to play. What's his name? Luke Ryan. Luke
Yes.
Ryan, obviously, taking the back seat, who had a bit of niggle preseason, but probably could have used him. Oscar McDonald, I don't think really had. Well, I think it was a defensive liability. If I'm going to be flat out honest, I think his best position is being more of a utility player from here on in. But as I said, it started to expose a bit of struggle. Yeah, Geelong's ball use around the ground was so much better, and at the same time, Freo's was starting to tank. They were turning the ball over fairly easily. They were just losing the outside game. Holmes, Smith, and Myers, they were just so dominant on the outside regions of GMHBA Stadium. And, as I said, it was just a bad night from their tolls, who were normally very clutch. They would eke out a win in these situations where they tend to falter a bit, but it just wasn't to be. And, yeah, as I said, in a vacuum, this is a very Geelong style game, winning a high scoring contest just by a little bit is just so weird to see that huge swing in effort from first half to second.
Yeah, it's very very interesting that that if it wasn't, it felt like if it wasn't for Mana, the poor secondary efforts just weren't going to weren't going to come back in
Yeah,
that second half. It gave Geelong that spark, that hope, and yeah, it allowed Jezza to kind of get back into the game. It
yeah,
allowed all of the other smaller players like Holmes and Myers to get into the game as well, to really step up their efforts and create a little bit more chaos that Freo just couldn't contain. And it just ended up being the right decisions made. They were able to sneak out and by an extra 10 points, stop Freo from being able to catch up in those dying minutes, and overall, in terms of the start of a campaign, going 2-0 would probably be better for Geelong, but 1-1
mm.
isn't bad.
Yeah. And it's another thing you could ask about Fremantle is how do you rate their performance? Because with the second half, it really felt like Geelong were giving them the game more. Well, when you look at the final team sheets and some of the performances, they had good performers in the first half, but they have a lot of players that were just pretty mediocre. Andy Brayshaw probably had one of his worst games that I've seen him play for a while. Neil Erasmus sort of dropped off a lot. Sam Wiskowski was almost unnotable. Jai Amos, he was, again, I get that he's turning into a very opportunistic forward, but there's just no second efforts.
Mm-hmm.
Voss had a bad game, don't get me wrong, 0-3. But still 6 tackles. I think half of them were in the forward half. He was still good trying to bring the ball to ground with a few that he didn't mark. But Jai, you really don't notice him unless he's taken one and kicked a cheap goal. And as I said, I think it's starting to get to the point where they're gonna. As I said, you wouldn't make too many knee-jerk reactions from one game, but as I said last year, I think we were very critical on Freo having a few passengers for a team that wanted to contend a bit deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just signs that they haven't quite worked it out yet. Because even a player like Judd McVie, who I really rated highly, didn't have a really good preseason and was pretty mediocre
I think
this
in
game as
terms of a
well.
player like McVee, because he's still so young, it'll take him a little bit to
Yeah.
properly grow into Freo's system. I feel like he was kind of thrown into the deep end a little bit in a game like this. Whereas for a player like Amos, where we have criticized quite a bit
Yeah.
over the past, especially the past 12 months, like we should be expecting more from him. We should be seeing more from him. We shouldn't be letting Voss, who was a revelation last year, and I think will have a fantastic 2026,
Hmm.
and Tracy do most of the work, because it just feels like he's I won't say he's letting the team down, but he's not taking the right amount of opportunities that he should be.
Yeah, and I think it's the awkward situation where it's like, well, do you bring in the Mason Cox? And then if you bring in Mason Cox, it's like, well, do you even continue playing Sean Darcy? Because, as I said,
Because at
he
that point, when
played
you have
half the
three
game.
rocks, then you'd like, what are you meant to kind of
Yeah.
do there?
And look, he had decent impact with his direct taps, but like, so does Jackson, and Jackson acts as a midfielder and does more around the ground. Like, wouldn't you want to be splitting Jackson's work with someone that, can play a bit more forward? And then you just have that double, like, dual prong, like they're both solid ruckmen. Obviously, probably not Mason Cox. Like, I'm not going to say Mason Cox is going to out-tap Sean Darcy. But, like, in the overall sum of what you want to do is, like, taps leading the score. Like, I just can't see Jackson Cox, at least at some point in the season. I think they're remiss. They'll be a bit remiss if they don't trial that. Because, yeah, as I said, again, I don't want to knock Sean Darcy. I really, maybe just take a bit of time for him to come into it. And we've known the injuries, but, yeah, I think even with the ruck rule, it's just the game has not done Sean Darcy much favors, and that contract is looking worse and worse. Like, to agree with Kane Corns, but because I don't think it's getting paid that much. Like, it was just a long-term contract, not an expensive contract.
Yeah, I don't think it was a back-ended contract. I think it was just a long-term.
Yeah, it's just so awkward trying to fit him into the team now, and yeah, as I said, whether his value is purely worth putting a spot even with the 25, it's you got to question it. I don't think they'll do anything now, but it's like what you look over the next weeks if Fremantle aren't able to pinch a few wins.
Yeah, it's their schedule for the first couple of rounds isn't too bad. But it's going to be definitely big question marks if they aren't able to get at least a win or two within the first couple of rounds. It's definitely going to be a little bit harder of a schedule if they don't at least get back on track early. I just want to quickly touch on the MRO because there was one player of note on the MRO list, and that is Neil Erasmus being fined $1,500, $1,000 with an early plea for contact with an umpire. Once again, it is back, and I don't think we're going to get rid of it.
No, as I said, yeah, you think they might be a bit more protected with the bowl ups and I guess the ruck movement pattern shouldn't really change things too
and
much.
And even like the last touch rule on the boundary, like it's less umpire involvement, but clearly,
yeah, true.
Clearly, it hasn't made much of a difference.
Yeah, not enough for some people. Yeah. Anyway, moving on to the Saturday night games, and yeah, it was one. If you weren't paying attention to the week, you might have stuffed up your tips. But it was what should have been a good game on paper, turning into a bit of a blowout.
Yes, up at the SCG, it was the Sydney Swans and the Brisbane Lions. For note, Brisbane Lions were without Darcy Gardner, Zach Bailey, and Harris Andrews. They were out for one game, and 3 games respectively. So it is extremely interesting to see how much of a difference that kind of made in terms of Brisbane's structure. But the scoreline, with a 44-point margin, Sydney wins out 15-14-104 to 8-12-60.
Yeah, and it's also mentioned that Hugh McCluggage and Logan Morris were also missing.
Yes.
Hugh McCluggage was that 1 week concussion. Don't actually know what happened to Logan Morris, but Yeah, there were just a lot of changes for the Lions, who, again, coming off a Sydney team that absolutely spanked Carlton. It was never a good sign. They'll be ruining the missed opportunities last week to sneak a game against the Western Bulldogs, because they start slowly for another year. Um, I think I didn't watch this game personally. This was a bit of a blur. I chose to watch the other game, but it was sort of hard because, again, their whole backline missing sounds froggy. But Brisbane didn't help their defense by all. They turned the ball over apparently numerous of times, and they weren't able to convert their stoppage dominance into actual score. Like, that's what we know Brisbane for. Almost like the Bulldogs. They're very bully half. We just know that their defense is a lot better. But as I said, this was pretty much a Bulldogs-esque Lions side. I know that defense is hard to come by this year, but it's really shocking to see how even some reasonably defending teams have gone to the wayside. I think maybe there's a bit of I think what will happen is maybe these teams start to focus a lot more about outside movement, preventing the ball from coming in, start paying a lot more attention to the wings, where we've seen the ball just rocket through very quickly. So, as I said, I think Sydney have a bit of equipment to do this. Unfortunately, the first really bit of bad news again is obviously Errol Goulden is hurt. He is looking to miss at least a month. He needs a minor shoulder surgery.
Yes.
But, as I said, we also seen the aggressive intercept hunking of Nick Blakey. Those sort of tactics might be better suited to try and defend this year. And they'll sort of suit Sydney, who last year just looked defensively out of it, trying to go into like a one-on-one style. I don't know whether it's just like Dean Cox sort of figuring out more the game style, or like really figuring out his player strengths a bit more. But so far, they've looked a lot more cohesive. Granted, it's been a bit onto Asterix-esque's opponent. Asterix, you know what I mean.
Something like that.
Brisbane missing their defense and Carlton being Carlton.
Yes. Yeah, and like we always kind of had an inkling that Brisbane were going to struggle going into this season, like at least early on, because that's kind of their track record for early in the season. Always takes them a little bit to get going. But like this bad, it's
yeah.
Last week was a concern. This week, because of the injuries, you can't. Oh, suspension. It's more suspensions than injury, but like,
yeah,
it's more of a question mark because it tests. This was a game that basically tests their depth, and it was not successful in the slightest. And that's not to mention the fact that like, and you're going to touch a little bit further on this, but like, you're still trying to bring in Lincoln McCarthy. You're still trying to bring in Keaton Coleman, and your recruits of Oscar Allen and Sam Draper, they aren't having. No, there's like very little impact from them as well at the same time. Like there's a lot of big changes like from this game, and it's definitely, I think it's going to be more of a massive learning experience for Fakes and the coaching staff than it will be for anything major on field right now.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where I get it. Like, as you mentioned, like, yeah, you do have to spend a bit of time integrating. I wouldn't really be dropping any one of those players. Like, I think Oscar Allen, if it was any other player, probably would be dropped at this point. But obviously, I think is worth putting a bit of time into. But I think it's just like the grit and effort, because we saw last year, like, Brisbane, they lost a few tough games against like good opponents and all that sort of stuff. But they were always a bit more courageous, had a bit more grit than this. Like, this was, again, I didn't watch the game, but like from what I've heard and what I've read, like this was a very tepid performance, really. And as I said, Sydney just, as I said, on the flip side, like Kerno and Roses, like they've been good in patches. Like, they haven't been fantastic. Like, I can't say that there's that much production difference between Sydney's recruit and Brisbane's recruits. But the difference is like they've got more productive systems around them that allows them to take time to get into their role. where we just haven't seen that from Brisbane this year. And we all thought, like, Brisbane are going to be really good because, as I said, they, players take some time in the early season, but they have so much talent around them, but they just haven't done that. And, as I said, you can say, there's players missing, but, like, there were suspensions. Like, they had control over a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I think it's like one of those things where you just sort of, you wouldn't be like ringing alarm bells, but you need a little focus regroup, in my mind.
Yeah, and like being the reigning premiers, there's a lot more eyes on you, going into this season because, granted, it's still very early days. A lot can change, but there's a lot more eyes on the Lions this year because they're going for the three-peat. They're trying to recreate what happened over 20 years ago in the early 2000s. Like this is a big thing. But yeah, to see them kind of falter this early is definitely a lot more of a big question mark surrounding how does the coaching staff adapt? What does Brisbane do if this happens again and they have to continue to test their depth? And will it last till the end of the season, essentially?
Yeah, because as I said, it's like, again, it would be one thing if like Brisbane just like crap the bed in like areas that they're normally pretty good at. But as I said, they still got a reasonable amount of inside 50s. They still smacked them in the clearances. Um, it's just Sydney were able to shape up so well outside the contest. And just Brisbane, for whether was unwilling to do that or a structural thing with the new players, they were just well behind the eight ball. So, but on the flip side, it allows Sydney to get off to an absolutely fantastic start of the year. Like, again, me being pretty critical of them, maybe not of being like I was pretty critical of like people putting Sydney like really high up the ladder, just due to some of their flaws and integration. And I do think like we've already seen like they're not really integrating Kerno or some of their forward differences to a huge degree. But we've seen some of the players just come out from the other side, like Joel Amartey. Like he has had a really good start to the season, and it's not
He's
just his
had a
goals.
fantastic game against Brisbane.
Yeah,
Which is very surprising because he played a good forward role last week, but he didn't
mm,
capitalize in terms of scoring that well last week. So having a good
yeah,
game this week against the Lions, I think, is very good for him, and obviously, good for the scoreboard.
yeah. And it's like players like Callum Mills having a really good game. Logan McDonald kicking a couple of goals, having a good one. Riley Bice, again, we talked about their halfback goal often being a bit tentative, a few turnovers, but Riley Bice continuing some good performances. And, as I said, you've got to give a bit of props to Chai Sarong coming in, playing a weird role on the wing, but it's like weirdly working. I really need to look more into it because, again, I really only watched that first half. But Chai Sarong, I don't understand anything they're doing with him, but it seems to be working. It was like Sam Wicks last year playing defense, which he still is playing. It's just like I don't understand how it happened, but this is the new reality.
Yeah,
So
pretty
yeah,
much, pretty much. Just touching on the MRO, there were two players that got pulled up by the MRO. For this game, Charlie Cameron being fined $3,000, $2,000 with an early plea for rough conduct against Brody Grundy in the first quarter, and Sam Wicks also fined the same amount for rough conduct against Kyle Lohman in the fourth quarter. But nothing else too much of note. Is there anything else we need to cover before we jump over to the next game?
nah. As I said, it's I think we've gone through enough of that. So we'll go to what was a fairly interesting matchup. One that started my tipping downfall. I think I was perfect up to that time. And then I really screwed the bed by switching my tip on this. We're talking obviously about Collingwood versus Adelaide.
Yes, this is a game that channels off of a little bit of rivalry that these two teams had last year, late in the season and going into finals as well. Off the top of my head, I can't remember that much. It's been a while already, and it's been a long week.
Yeah, Collingwood
Um,
started Adelaide going out in straight sets.
yes, that's right. So there's a little bit of a grudge match against this one, especially as they on the Adelaide side of things. So they pretty much came out firing on the MCG. And with a 14-point margin, they did end up winning out 13-15-93 to 11-13-79.
Yeah, but it was a lot more comfortable. Like,
Yes.
this was a very late Collingwood surge, but as I said, and one of the reasons I switched my tip was just after seeing Geelong being able to come back so from such a huge margin against Freo. I was saying that this was probably a 60-40 game. I was slightly favouring Adelaide. I thought Collingwood were okay against St Kilda, but not that great. Still thought how their forward line will go. But I was like, well, they're pretty good control team, pretty good with ball in hand. I think if Adelaide starts to tire out, they'll be able to come back. But obviously, I was not expecting Adelaide, especially with a defender down in Worrell, being really solid. Like at Collingwood for the whole match got 1-1 from their key forwards, all produced by Daniel McStay. And Collingwood were just never going to score enough, despite a solid effort from the small brigade. I think Elliott had a couple pretty good games. Schultz got involved. But as I said, like Collingwood were forced creatively to try and find goals, and they did try. Nick Dacos, again, creating goals from nothing. Again, starting a really good part of the season. But yeah, as I said, Adelaide were just really rounded. There was a few question marks going into this game. Adelaide playing their two younger rucks instead of playing big, what's his name?
Riley Ryan.
Riley O'Brien. And I think McAndrews gave Cameron an unexpected ruckwork lesson. And, I mentioned before, but, the surprise loser of this week's rucking was Collingwood, who only got 19 hitouts against
That's
two
very
young
low
rucks.
for Cameron. Like, that is very
Yeah,
out
no,
of the
he
ordinary.
got absolutely smacked. Like, it was okay-ish around the ground. But in the pure hitouts, especially after a good display at the State of Origin game, like that was, really surprising. The only team, in fact, to score under 20 hitouts. I'm not sure if anyone from Collingwood got another hitout. So, yeah, it was 16 hitouts from Darcy Cameron, 3 from Daniel McStay, compared to 27 for Lachlan McAndrews, 7 for Toby Murray, who pretty much just played as a sub, and 1 for Sam Berry. I want to see that hit out because that is not the sort of player that I expect to register a hit out come the end of the game.
Fair enough.
So, yeah, as I said, it was, other than that, like, as I said, I'm talking a lot about hit outs, but like the stats were very similar this game. It was really just execution from control from Adelaide that got a very mature win and broke that MCG hoodoo. This was a really solid game to start the season with, even though like people will be retroactive. Like people are tipping, I think it was like 80% tips for Collingwood. And people are saying, oh, Collingwood's all slow, and then they win once and they're like, oh, they're back. And but Adelaide, they just look composed and like, as I said, people were like, oh, they'll lose a few games. They won't get like top 4 again this season. But there's enough here to suggest that they've still got that in them. I'm not reacting too much out of one game. I'm also considering last year. But, the way they went around this game compared to last year was just so much better. And I think you got to give him a lot of credit.
I'm just quickly looking back at the tips and just to make sure that I did tip the Crows in this one, and I did. Thank God. I generally could not remember who I tipped for this game. But yeah, no, and the fact that like the Crows did it without Keane, who going off of last year probably ended up being their best key defender, or they're just their best player in their back six as a whole for a lot of last season. Like the fact that they got this win without him and still looked really good defensively is a credit to the system that they've built. The fact that they've started the season also without Rankin and still like having fantastic games so far. Granted, it's only one, but still point stands. Is really good for them. Especially on the MCG of all places, because it's a ground that they have struggled to win at over the past few years, which is why winning this game again, as you said, breaks that hoodoo. Um, yeah, and like midfield wise, they looked fantastic. Forward line, still looked fairly good. Could use a little bit of work on their conversion. But that's kind of standard for most forward lines at the moment. Again, it's still early days.
Mm.
But otherwise, like I'm very impressed with what Adelaide was able to bring to this game.
Yeah, like the only thing you can say is, oh, like they didn't score that much from stoppage, but like neither did Collingwood. It was 4-1-25 to 2-4-16, which, yeah, sure, 4 goals from stoppage, but again, it was really 5 scoring shots to 6.
Hmm.
And like they were just very solid at the contest. Which again, you don't always prescribe to a team like Adelaide, who are a lot more on the outside, sort of ground ball get, setting up from halfback. Which again, they were fantastic, scoring. What was it, 50 odd, 52 points, 8-4 from defensive half, and you can't really say that stat without saying the absolutely phenomenal game that was Wayne Malira.
Yes.
He was absolutely fantastic on halfback, launched so much. He was involved in 11. Was it? Uh, oh, sorry, no, he was involved in 8 score involvements, but 4 of those were launched off his own boot. Um, so yeah, as I said, he really had a high impact game. I think he was the highest ranking player from that match. So yeah. But again, on the outside, they were just a lot more mature. Collingwood are also like a fairly decent outside team, so that's a fairly solid performance. But yeah, players like Cumming, Neil Bullen, Cook were very fantastic
I'm
as well.
still very impressed with how much Neil Bullen has been able to lift since leaving the Demons. Like I think he's had a fantastic season and a bit so far since coming over. Like it's been really, really solid to see.
Yeah, because I think most of us thought he was going to be a bit more of a cameo pick. Like, starting to get on the end of his career. Like, we know his distribution, but we thought, oh, they've got so many options. Like, he'll just, like, be a bit of a link-up player. He doesn't have to win the ball himself. But, he wins a fair few ball. His marking's really solid. He gets a lot of ground ball gets, especially forward half. Like, normally you expect him a bit higher on the wing, but he's able to get the hard ball at ground level in that forward 50. And, yeah, as I said, he's just a really, really solid addition of that. Like the 3 forward half wingers that that they choose to employ. If you add Rochelle into that mix, you know, it's just a very, very lethal combination.
Yeah, exactly right. Like the Crows are very much in a really good position right now. Again,
Mm.
Collingwood is always going to be very up and down as to what people's opinions are of them. Again, there's always a question about
Yeah.
whether they're too old. There's always a question of like maybe they're too young now all of a sudden because they've got such a young core coming through.
Yeah,
But
that's it.
I think it's just pure based on like skill level at the moment because
Yeah.
like it's not that Collingwood are missing like too much. Yeah, they have a couple of injuries and it's not helping them at all at the moment. Like what they're still missing Darcy Moore, Jeremy Howe. Um, like they're kind of two of the bigger defensive players for them. But like honestly, like Collingwood's midfield is still really good. Their forward line has gotten a lot better. Like from the off season. Especially now that they've had little bit more time to kind of assimilate some of their newer players that they acquired, like that did play last year, like Membry, and any other
Yeah.
player that I'm forgetting. Like they've had a little bit more time to properly formulate a decent forward line. Like, and it still looks decent, but yes,
Yeah.
it is their defense that I guess it's probably a little bit more of the letdown right now.
No, I'd still say it's offense, to be honest. Like, I get what you're saying, but I think it's just that awkward precipice point where I'm actually saying, like, I don't think you can play all of Membry, McStay, and Jack Buller, because I think it's just,
Oh yeah, I forgot they
again,
brought over
it's just that
Buller.
awkward. Yeah, and he presented, look, he didn't have that much time on the ground. And, as I said, I don't think
Yeah,
anyone expected him to, light the game. It's just, whether it's worth playing him, especially when, Collingwood's forward line production is a lot more on ground level. And we've seen them also be quite creative, because I don't know if you watch much of this game, but I thought a lot of the efforts of Rowan Steele was very good. As I said, he pushed up enough to get 3 scores, 2 of them being goals. And, as I said, he sort of, it sort of like plays a bit more of a Lockie Schultz role where, as I said, he can occasionally take a few marks. I only really took one for the game, but he was presenting well. But, also be a distributor when need be. So I think that's a nice mix. As I said, it would just be nice if they had a speedier target to go to. Jamie Elliott hasn't quite been as good a marking present as he was last year. But aside from that, they don't really have strong leads. Like McStay, he can take a mark in a contest, but doesn't really move that much. I think they're looking at Buller to come out a bit, but he hasn't found his groove. And Tim Membry. I think really he's just like the occasional mark and bringing the ball to ground at this stage of his career.
Yeah, it's that's a much fairer assessment of their offense right now. I think you're completely right. It's like they have defensive efforts, but their offensive efforts aren't exactly where they should be. And like having a good marking presence, being able to, you know, have cleaner clearances out of the midfield, running both ways along the wings to be able to stop an offensive charge, those sorts of things. Collingwood are lacking in those areas a little bit. And you have players that can create some opportunities off of turnovers, off of rebounds. But when you don't have enough of that effort up forward, then it's your conversion rate off of those just is not where it should be.
Yeah, exactly. But, I do think on the flip side, like, we also got to remember they're playing Adelaide, who have, were a really fantastic outside team last year. They had a lot of great rebound. So, honestly, I still think the fact that they got 79 points, got a few late goals, still got, 24 scoring shots. Like, I wouldn't be too worried. Like, but I do think this is a Collingwood team that's like gonna win a lot of games below them. But yeah, I can't really see them scoring against the really solid bully front half teams. Like your Bulldogs. I was gonna say Brisbane, but they're not. They haven't earned the right to be in the conversation so far. Sydney, Gold Coast. As I said, I think they're just going to struggle against a few opponents that they were sort of a lot better last year, where they could just defensively grind out a contest.
Yeah.
But again, who knows? It might be different when Moore and Howe come back, and it might be different when teams are getting a bit tighter. Because again, I haven't talked about it much, but I don't think this high scoring offense is going to be like the whole season. And I think like Adelaide again sort of just like hints at some of the good ways to try and defend with their solid outside performance. Same as what I was talking about with Sydney. I think there's some hints to how teams are going to defend later on in the season when you sort of expect it to become a bit more defensive contests.
Yeah, I completely agree. Jumping over to the MRO now, and there are a couple players of note here. James Peatling fined $1,500, $1,000 with an early plea for contact with an umpire. Steele Sidebottom fined $2,500, $1,500 with an early plea for striking Hugh Bond in the third quarter. And then the big one, and the one that this episode is named after, Scott Pendlebury suspended for one match, which is being contested, for rough conduct against Josh Worrell in the fourth quarter. It was a careless knock to the head. Graded careless contact, medium impact, and careless conduct, medium impact, high contact, which is why it comes under the suspension rule. However, they are going to charge it likely under the quote-unquote good bloke rule that is still somehow in effect for on-field incidents.
Yeah.
So
it's not really a rule. It's a tribunal.
It's a tribunal thing. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens. I believe it's either tonight or, as we're recording this, or tomorrow night when the episode comes out. So it'll be very interesting
Shout
to
outs to
see.
Xavier Zeta, who have to listen to a lot of
Yeah,
lackluster
I genuinely
lawyer speak.
when Zeitz has to cover all of the MRO stuff, like it's just so interesting, like watching his Twitter feed, and he's just
Oh
he
yeah,
kind of just, pardon my French, but he just talks a lot of shit about it, and it's great, honestly. Like it's good content.
yeah. Well, I think it's good because I think he knows enough about the system works, like to where like he knows what's actually like he knows like, oh yeah, this is bullcrap, but this is just what they use. But then like there'll be something just so out of place, a team just like ultra desperately trying to chuck whatever crap onto the wall and see what sticks. Um, that yeah, as I said, his Twitter is a goldmine. So I would definitely be maybe if you're at work or something, maybe have the light watch on the Zeta feed while you're doing your stuff. So it's good entertainment.
It is good
Um,
entertainment.
yeah. Talking about what wasn't good entertainment, shall we head on to the Sunday matches?
Yes, and I apologize.
Mm.
I'm going to apologize to you and every other Port Adelaide fan potentially listening to this, because how do you let this happen at Marvel Stadium against the Kangaroos? 46-point margin, 17-11, 113 to 9-13, 67. North Melbourne winning their first game of the season.
Well, look, I like North Melbourne winning. Like, I'm not overly that shocked or disappointed by it. Like, I know North, I still don't think they're going to be like one of the top teams in the competition. But like, if we saw what like the football style being played is this year, and it's like a fast brand offense, whatever. You can score a lot of more points from stoppages, all that sort of thing. Better link up between midfield and forward lines. All that advantages North Melbourne. What was really disappointing was just how insipid Port was. Their midfield did not fire a shot against North's midfield. Like, and, like some of the best Supercoach performers, were Rosie Drew and Butters, and they were all spanked by their midfield counterparts. It was just a game where there wasn't many players at all for Port Adelaide that were carrying their own weight. Oh, sure, Rosie had a few disposals. He also gave away a lot of bad back half turnovers, which was pretty much the go for Port Adelaide. Like, North Melbourne were absolutely getting some free as you like score from some of Port's ball use. They were also missing a lot of tackles. I think I caught it at the end, and I think it was 19 missed tackles to Port to 7 at the start of the fourth quarter, which was pretty pathetic. And yeah, as I said, it was almost like the ghost of Hinkley was directing the back half and some of their forward entries too. And it's not to say that North Melbourne were the cleanest football team going around, but to their credit, they actually put in the defensive efforts to prevent as much score coming from their turnovers that Port just weren't able to do. I was really impressed by how much more resolve North Melbourne's defense were having. And yeah, I get it was Port Adelaide, not the most offensively dominant team, but there were signs of cohesion that we just haven't seen in North for a long, long time.
I think we saw some of it briefly at the end of last year. And as much as it pains me to say this, especially against the game against Richmond down in Tassie, I
Yeah.
think we saw a lot more of North finally building towards something in those latter half games. And I generally think it's actually kind of put on like full display against Port here. Like we expected it maybe to come against a more guaranteed, quote unquote, guaranteed wins kind of side. Like maybe it's against a Richmond
West Coast
or a
or
West
Richmond, yeah.
Coast, or even an Essendon, I guess. But like against Port, it's definitely a shock, and the fact that like they like took advantage of so much space. Like you had Sheasel, you had LDU, you even had Luke Parker for a bit having a lot of free space in some areas. Like from the moments that I did get to see at this game, it just felt like North had so much free reign of just being able to kind of do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, and I guess this is what we're talking about, and especially the Roos, they came out and said, "Oh, we can't just be a potential team anymore. We've got to perform." And like their list, like they're not a young team heading out there. They were the 8th oldest side to take the park. They were the last team with an average experience of over 100. So they're older than the Western Bulldogs. They're older than the Gold Coast. Um, and obviously a lot older than Port, who put out the third youngest side, tied second youngest side with Richmond.
Well, yeah, realistically, you look at North's list, and they should be in their prime for contending for finals in terms of age and experience. But and we could say that, not that this is going to guarantee anything. This could be the year where they finally start to make the right steps to getting towards that goal again. And this is very obviously a very good start. But we don't want to jinx anything like that right now.
Yeah, I do think that there's still maybe a bit of problem with bowl use, but again, they've got a lot more productivity, and as I said, yeah, they've still got. It's hard to tell because they were gifted a lot of this game, and like again, I don't want to take too much away from North because again, we were talking very direly about them at the start of the season, and I do think that you have to give them a lot of credit, but you also got to remember again, sample size of 1. As I said, while I wouldn't rule out Port for the entire year, they were playing a young lineup. Primarily by choice too. Like there were a few older players that they just left off the park. Zerk Thatcher and Ollie Wines being interesting players to leave out to start the season. But yeah, as I said, it was they just did not have a team that was, like I was very worried about team lineup. It's always hard to tell when you don't have like, the ins and outs from the week before, but so they were playing this really, really young side, a lot of new players, and they just weren't impressive at all. Like they were really bad. Like, like North's mediocre performances were still fine. And, again, like also shout outs, I haven't mentioned it so far, but Dylan Stevens, like he dominated Port. And like Dylan Stevens is probably like my like lowest ranked person of like any time I brought up a bad performance last year, probably of the last 2 years. He had an absolutely fantastic day on the wins. Granted, he was up against youngster Ewan McKinlay, but like still, like that was a way more mature effort, way above any performance we've seen from him so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, it's just like, but when you look at, there was really nothing. Like, even the leaders, like Elia probably had his worst game. Miles Bergman was pretty woeful. His move to the center has not been that great. And like you look at the clearances, it's like, oh, Zach Butters on 9. Yeah, but he was tagged by O'Sullivan. Like he had a lot to bear, and no one was lifting up. Like Connor Rosie, 1 clearance, spent a lot of the time in the center. Will and Drew was the next best with 4. And 4 was North's, what was it, 5th worst, 5th best performance by Tom Powell, who had a pretty solid game. So you know what I mean? It was just such a lack of contest, and it was just such a shame to see not that much change from the worst aspects of Port's football last year to this year. Again, beat it on the ground. Ground ball gets were fairly even, I guess, but like, yeah, Port weren't really doing that much from them. Smacked in the clearances. Tackling efforts, again, North had more ball and out-tackled Port Adelaide. It was just, yeah. Again, yeah, it said like 370 disposals to 287, and yet North Melbourne win the tackling. Who, again, North Melbourne aren't the best-known tackling team by 6. So, yeah, as I said, it was pretty horrendous by Port Adelaide. Like, they've seen a few players say like, oh, there's like a bit a few young players, like McKinlay and Dante Vicentini is okay in terms of pure ruck. I think Sherry was a lot better around the ground, and I don't think they'll be caring that he only got 16 hit outs. But it was a pretty woeful performance by Port Adelaide. There was honestly, I would just say this is just for a new coach, this is just a game you put a line through. Really, this is his worst performance as you want to see for the year, and it's just a shame that it happened from a debut game for a coach.
Yeah, it's whilst in terms of I guess Clarko's head, I think the Shinboners are a little bit more happy about North and him this time around.
Yeah.
But yeah, for Josh Carr, it's not a great start. But again, it's only one round, small sample size. We can't put too much on it right now. Again, we talked about this at length during the off season of new coaches and kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt going into a new season, or as their first time. We did it with Uze, we did it with McQualter, we'll do it with Josh Carr, we did it with Dean Cox. We'll always give coaches the benefit of the doubt in the first season, maybe first season and a half, because it is different than being an assistant coach. It is actually a whole different kettle of fish. Even though there's been a transition process and that they've been eyed to take that role for a long time. Essentially, that's what they've been working towards. But once you have that control, there's a lot going on. So we'll always give them that benefit of the doubt. But otherwise,
you do. But the thing that hurts, is what we're gonna probably segue into, was the other debut coaching performance coming from Kingy, whatever his first
Stephen
name
King.
is. I still don't know.
Stephen King.
Stephen King.
Unlike,
Jeez, such
at least he's not one of the 3 Max Kings that could have been in the league.
yeah, exactly.
But yes,
we'll move on to the MCG.
Yes, a Sunday afternoon clash between the Demons and St Kilda that ended up being a really, really good game. Kind of swept under the rug, because it's Melbourne and St Kilda, but 13-point margin, 18-12, 120 to 15-17, 107, with the Demons winning out. But you would not, when you look at this game on paper going into it, you would not expect a high scoring, really fun, offensive based and defensive based game from both teams. And it ended up being probably one of the best games of the round.
Yeah, and when we talk about defenses, in this scope, there was still a lot of solid defensive efforts. I think Melbourne did really good to try and quell some of St Kilda's offensive. Because it is weird. Last week, I think that, I said, St Kilda probably weren't as creative as they could be. Where this week, I said this was, honestly, St Kilda football, this week was probably more towards what they're aiming to achieve. And, they lost against Melbourne, but, I don't think they did that much wrong. I just think that Melbourne had an absolute belter of the game. And, honestly, it really sucks for Saints because, it's, haha, funny. They spent a lot of money on players and it hasn't quite worked for them so far. But, really, there's 2 weeks where they've had games where they probably had rights to winning. Had really good performances. They were somewhat even. But, they were just beaten out. Last week, obviously, Collingwood doing enough. And this week, Melbourne having an absolutely fire game. But, as I said, there was a lot to talk about. Some of the individual efforts. Max Hall, probably as good as your game you could probably have in a losing side. He was absolutely dominant on the outside, kicks 4 goals. We'll talk about him a bit more in detail, but Nazai Wangani-Malira is not playing the couple of games we thought he would, but he's still really doing well as our half-forward pinch mid. And Sinclair and Wilkie were still directing the back line, the inside mids. really did reasonably, even though Gawn had a field day against TDK.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, all of this being said, Melbourne just clutches it out. Van Rooyen, absolutely fantastic game. Plays like the forward that we all thought he could be when he was first recruited. Harry Sharp, he was essentially the equivalent of what we're going to get to a super sub. Comes on for a few games, goes in the forward line, a few pressure acts, some really, really nice things, and kicks 1-1 with a few score involvements. Pretty much similar impact to Cozzy Pickett, just with a lot less time. Cozzy, I think, did fairly well.
Sharp's role feels like the Dane Swan of the early 2000s, where he'd be thrust in after sitting on the bench for a while, does a couple of really, really good things for a couple of minutes, comes back off for another 10.
Waddles off. Exactly.
Burst players are basically what they are. And whilst, again, low
sample
size, that's basically
obviously before Dane Swan become that really consistent beast. But I know what you mean. Early in career, he was very stop-start. But yeah, because I pick it again, I think when all things considered, considering he had a pretty off and on preseason, having to take a bit of time off, I think his performance is fairly fine. It's good to see him and his brother there, cousin, Latrell.
Yes.
Him kicking the goal. Cousin or brother? I've forgotten already. They probably said it 10 million times on the broadcast.
I think they're cousins.
Yeah. I was listening with sound off. I was sort of doing something else.
Just a note on Naz. He was tagged for most of this game, but the fact that he still had some pretty solid impact around the ground, and even in and obviously in front of goal, is very solid. But obviously, he wasn't going to be the kind of player that will get tagged and stuff like that until it became more notable. And now that he is more notable, he's got more eyes on him because he did kind of fly under the radar for a little bit.
Season. It's just honestly, I think it's going to get a bit more hate because it's going to be if you have him in a fantasy team, it's probably burnt you already this season. But people are saying, oh, he's being misused, but he's had a heavy attention, and instead of congesting up the midfield, sometimes I think the worst thing he can do is try and brute force shake off the tag that is strong, because some players are capable of doing that. We've seen that with Lachie Neale, but I don't think Langani Manila is that sort of player. So to actually take him away from the contest allows other players for St Kilda, like Sam Flanders. He's not a sort of player that is going to always win it if it's going to be that congested. But if you give him space to move, Flanders had a really good performance. Just the 4 clearances, but a lot of good contested possession work. And, as I said, Jack McRae still prinching in. And, as I said, you just take Malira and provide a bit more offense. So, it's weird, 0-2 with Malira having less production than you want for his millions and millions of dollars. But I don't think the Saints are going around this the wrong way. I think it's just really a couple of really good performances the other way. I will say, I think their forward line is the biggest disappointment so far. Sharman hasn't really gotten to the game at all. Another potential injury to Mateus Philippou, who was playing a bit more forward. And obviously Isaac Keeler, sometimes playing in that forward line, having fairly, it's just, you just wish they had a player to cap all this playoff. And, whether it's going to be Max King when he eventually comes back in, but we've seen Melbourne have a year where they just had no forward line to kick into, still had some decent performances, but languishing. You just wonder if maybe this might be, if things don't improve for St Kilda, maybe this is just the rebuilding year where they're setting up some decent structure, maybe not having the complete personnel to pull it off, but I don't mind these sort of performances, even though it might be a bit tough for the Saints to swallow, because they really want to be heading towards finals, and a 0-2 start isn't exactly the best way to go about it.
Yeah, the fact that Melbourne were just kind of, despite how many changes they had going into this season, the fact that they were able to come out early and show that they have worked incredibly hard on
Mm.
being able to fill those gaps that they've lost from Petrarca and Oliver specifically,
Mm.
to bringing in a new head coach, create a brand new style of play for them that actually works, and
Mm.
you're able to put on a high scoring performance, really solid defensive efforts from both your young players and your veterans, and like just show the footy world that you are not done yet. That there is still
Yeah.
a brief opportunity here to make your way back to finals, which is what people have been expecting since 2021. Um,
Yeah.
like there is a very, very slim chance, again, small sample size, we're going to keep saying this early on, but from what we've seen so far of Melbourne, if they're able to keep this sort of consistency against teams either around their range or slightly above them,
Mm.
they could potentially have a really good season here.
Yeah, or at least the season that gets into that like 9th and 10th spot that still gets them into
That's
finals.
kind of what
Because
we're expecting, is like the lower end of the wild card
yeah,
kind of position.
exactly. But like what I really liked is like, yeah, sure, we had a couple of really good performances like Van Rooyen 6, Max Gawn, who was absolutely sensational, probably or easily the best ruckman of the round. But like in terms of a leadership role, I think also maybe the best leadership performance we've seen for the week. And his defensive running, absolutely fantastic. But I won't go too far into that because, again, like everyone chipped in. Like there really wasn't too many stragglers. Like, a lot of the players that had low possessions at least had like a few moments. Like, again, Latrell Pickett, Brody Mychek managed 3 goals, even though he wasn't the most dominant player in the competition. There was a nice little work back game for him. Jai Cully had an absolutely ripper mark and a solid goal. Like, he was a bit hit or miss on the wing, but like he had some really good burst plays. And like, Windsor, Chandler, Lindsay, Blake Howes had a fair few solid performances. Like, it was just like there's not too many players where you're going Melbourne for a team that was looking to languish. So you're like, yeah, I'd probably say like if you don't have a couple more good weeks, I might drop you. You know what I mean? Like it was just really solid. Whereas like even St Kilda, like, even though I do think like I don't think there's too much to complain about the last 2 weeks, but as I said, they might be looking to make a few adjustments to try and even out that sort of offensive conversion. Because as I said, like I think defense, yeah, might be an issue, but again, I think defense is just hard to come by. I think their rebound's still pretty solid, and I think that's what you just gotta work with for this stage of the season. But as I said, it's just a shame that they're probably good enough to have won a game this season. But yeah, as I said, they've just entered the ledger 0-2. As much as I'd like to rag on the Saints for these, lackluster performances, yeah, I don't actually think they've done much wrong.
No, I think it's
I'm not
just
going to sit here
I
and
think
rag on them.
they just didn't super capitalize on accuracy. Like,
Yeah.
and that's just kind of how it is in some of these games. Like going all the way back to Thursday night. Like, if Tom Lynch had kicked 1 goal instead of one behind, Richmond could have won by a point.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it is just accuracy, and sometimes that's just how it is. Sometimes you
Yeah.
just
I
can't be
hate to
controlled.
say it, like St Kilda were a tiny bit better than
They were very
Richmond,
much a lot
in
better.
terms
I'm
of overall
aware
ball
of
use.
this.
Yeah. Look, I get you though. Like, when you take your chances, like AFL is very fickle when you don't take your chances.
It
And
is.
as I said, like as impressive as St Kilda has been, if they crap the bed the next couple of games, like it's dire straits for them. But
Yes.
like yeah, as I said, like if you're a Saints supporter and you're disappointed, it's like, yeah, you've got every right to be. But I still think the foundation is here for a fairly solid season. But you have to give a lot of credit to Melbourne. And, props to Collingwood for the week before as well.
Yeah.
Where they managed to eke out a game where St Kilda had a lot of the territory, a lot of the possession, but Collingwood just eked out a little win through a bit more clutch performance.
There's just slightly more tenacity in that one, which was, extremely, extremely lucky for them. All right, jumping over to our last game of the round, and our very, very first coast-to-coast game of the season, the Gold Coast Suns and the West Coast Eagles. And a very interesting game, not purely for the margin, not purely for Just the Suns, getting a quote unquote easy win against the Eagles, but more so the fact that in the second half of this game, the Eagles fought back and they showed a lot of positive signs and a lot of positive life. That maybe, maybe this could be the season where they finally jump off of 18th after being able to really kind of take it back to the Suns in a lot of areas.
Yeah, because look, as I said, the first half was almost as worse as it could be. The only positive was obviously, and we'll talk about him a bit, rookie Milan Murdoch kicking 2 goals. 2 of the 3 first half goals for West Coast. So, they were out of the contest, but still getting some okay stats. Okay stats with not much conversion from them. But what was happening was the Gold Coast were just elite with their ball use. They were so damaging from their center. And even though West Coast still had a bit more than you would expect, I think Yo did very well on his round back. And they were getting a fairly even performances in the clearances. They weren't they didn't have any huge clearance rackers, but it was definitely a lot more spread than last year. In fact, over half their team recorded a clearance, which is pretty nice. But when you look at the top performers, in that Gold Coast Suns, it's hard not to look past one Christian Petrarca, who has had
Yes.
probably the best 2 opening games
Before you go
that you could
through
probably have.
the full list of notes that you have on this man, I just want to quickly outwardly mention the actual score line because I did not do that yet.
Sorry.
59-point margin, 2011, 131 to 10, 12, 72. This game was played on the Gold Coast. I believe they do match up again later in the year, and that one will likely be played at Optus. Just to make sure we get the 2 coast-to-coast games in, of course. But yes, Christian Petrarca, first of all, what a signing by the Suns to get him up there. First of all, that part is elite. But the stats that he's put together from these 2 games alone is, apart from the Bont, just doing the Bont things in 1 game alone, this is elite.
Yeah.
This is just straight up elite.
Yeah, and I've written the thing, 57 disposals, 12 clearances, okay, yeah, fine. But then you add the 7 goals and 26 score involvements, which means 47% of his touches turn into a score for his team. He has a champion data rating of 34, which is 5 above and almost equally impressive Bontempelli. Bonds had an absolutely fantastic 2 games to start the season, and it's still a run up to get to Christian Petrarca's first 2 games. Yeah, it's an impressive. The signing's not actually as impressive. You just chuck money to him. He wanted to leave.
Yeah, but no one was expecting him to go to the Suns on initial impact. It was kind of at a left field kind of grab.
Maybe, I guess, but I think the integration, you maybe look on the outside and say, the Suns already have tons of midfielders. What do they need? But they were able to be okay, we're going to spend a lot of money on him, but we know that most of his damage can be done forward of the ball. He doesn't have to take every centre bounces to be dangerous. He can start on the half-forward flank. And, he's just shown that, as I said, it's not just about the centre bounce. You can become so well-rounded by, taking a player, knowing his strengths, and using him to not only maybe not even his best ability, because I think, still, if you played him as a pure midfielder, you'll be racking up similar sort of possessions. But knowing, where the peak optimization for his performances are, which is exactly what Gold Coast have been doing. And, that doesn't actually happen if you don't have Took Miller, Jared Witts, Noah Anderson, having fantastic performance, and all without Matt Rao. You would even say, you just put Petrarca in the middle and, instead of Matt Rao. But no, they're okay, we'll play Alex Davies in the middle. We'll play Will Powell in the middle. We'll believe in the players that we've been growing into being, integration, that they're already looking to integrate into part of their midfield. And, it's paying dividends, and it's allowing others to shine as well. So, Yeah, as I said, it's an absolutely insane a couple of performances. If he doesn't have 6 Brownlow votes, it will be an absolute beggar's belief.
Absolutely. Like, he's
But
just incredible.
but yeah, as I said, we do have to talk about West Coast in that second half because honestly, the clearances were fine. West Coast actually won the centre clearance count. They just had bad ball use and a lack of control with ball in hand.
Yes.
Weren't quite as clinical as the Suns. But Yo, Reed, Murdoch, and Robinson, all really solid games. As I said, it was just the disaster of the contested start that killed any hopes for a close game. But they did recover after halftime, and I think you have to give them a lot of credit because, honestly, if you compare Geelong's junk time goals, the Eagles had a lot better performance than Geelong did in round 0 against the Suns. And I know the Suns haven't had that much competition in terms of direct. A fair bit of that is their own doing, mind you. But, as I said, the Eagles showed signs. And, as I said, it's all you can really do because, again, they have a team that perform absolutely atrociously. Well, actually, no, I should say they do have that. I don't know. I've forgotten whatever the schedule is, but I do also want to say is and we'll talk about it in a tiny bit.
Mm-hmm.
The AFL really screwed over the Eagles. They finished last, and the AFL makes them take the longest trip you can take against a Suns team that played round 0 and is on their second game at home.
Yeah.
What are you doing? I know, yeah, scheduling's hard and all that, and it's hard to make a balanced fixture and whatever. But and we talk about you look at the teams that had to play teams that played round 0, and the teams were West Coast, Adelaide, Fremantle, all teams that are out of state already, and it's just oh, did I say Adelaide as well?
You did say
I
Adelaide.
can't remember. Okay, cool. But yeah, as I said, it's just it just boggles the mind that, as I said, when we talk about equalizations, it's not always, home and away. It's making sure that, you take into consideration some of these teams' travels and all that. But this is them shafting, a team that's already going to struggle a lot this season. And I will say, they showed a fair bit of grit to get back into the contest. Because again, running out in the second half is hard. I was thinking this is going to be 100-point plus loss with the way that some of these second half performances from teams that have been fresh facing against a team that's already played. But nah, as I said, they rebounded back. So you do have to give them a bit of kudos.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I just brought up the Eagles' schedule for the first couple of rounds. So
yeah,
obviously didn't play opening round. Suns round 1, North Melbourne round 2, Port Adelaide round 3, Sydney round 4, Geelong round 5.
Yeah, so they have a bit of a mixed bag, but yeah, as I said, I really think that they could have given them a bit more. Either a softer opponent first round and then go into a match like this, or yeah, as I said, I just can't, as I said, and Fremantle as well, they've only been scheduled against teams that have played in the first round, and all of them have been, I think all of them were scheduled to be away. They didn't manage, they're 1-1 in that ledger, obviously one of them being Geelong last year, where they had that rained out match. But yeah, they were again, they had Geelong coming off that game going into GMHBA when Geelong should have played the round before. And the AFL have made them do the exact same trip 2 years in a row. So, yeah, a negative shout out to the AFL for that. The only thing I want to say for this is, yeah, the Suns look fantastic. Again, pretty unchallenged. But, geez, the Suns and the Bulldogs, you almost want to move that game forward. It's in round 19. But you almost want to see it now because, again, offenses at a premium, center clearances, a lot of scores being able to come from the center. You just want to see it while it's peak. So, yeah, if the AFL is going to do bullcrap things with the fixture, move that match up to round 3, please.
Oh,
Just
honestly,
switch
if
them.
if they could do that now, it would be amazing because just
Yeah,
seeing those two teams, they're basically already at their peak. Like
yeah,
that would be, such an elite game. That would be crazy to see now.
yeah. Because a lot can change. Like I do think there'll be some form of defensive comeback. For all teams across the board in the
Oh
back
yeah.
half of the year.
Oh yeah.
But I think we got to enjoy some of the higher octane performances because again, I don't think in terms of blowouts, like again, 3 really solid watchable games and like 5 close contests for the start of the year. It's not terrible. I think the AFL outside this thing has done a lot worse things to start the season. I will go to last week, in fact, because I was in Brisbane.
Hmm.
Like, there was flags around, like they were promoting the AFL and all that. You had things, but like they come home on Friday night, they can't watch the Bulldogs and Brisbane put on a clinic. That's locked on free to wear. Like, how are you going to expand the game? Like, they might as well just watch rugby. So anyway, so as I said, I think the AFL's like done a lot to shoot themselves in the foot. I do think that despite the blowouts, I think it's an okay start to the season. But yeah, as I said, it's going to be interesting to see how some of the hype goes. Because again, with the opening round, we've finally got like a full taste of football, and then we go back into bye territory after this match,
Yep.
or after this week. Sorry.
Yeah, pretty much. But just before we end on the on this round, I do just want to just give a little bit more praise to the Eagles because again, like one of the toughest opponents in the league
Oh,
right now is the Gold Coast Suns, and yeah, that second half performance, like the fact that they were able to not make it a 100-point blowout for one is good.
yeah.
The fact that we saw so many good positive signs from all aspects of the ground, even if
Mm,
their generalized skill use still needs a lot of work, is good. Like they're on
yeah.
a really good trajectory, even if it's like minuscule movements upwards, it's still a positive trajectory. And I think that once a little bit more time in the season has occurred, they faced their mixed bag of opponents. Who knows? They might end up squeaking out a win against North next week. Who knows?
Mm,
Like that may come early rather than later. I think they're in a really, really good position, and I hope that Eagles fans are pretty happy with what they saw because, like, there's it's not guaranteed that you're going to
mm,
be able to have those kinds of performances against these elite teams. Like a team like the
yeah.
Bulldogs will probably absolutely slaughter you. A team like
Yeah.
I want to say Brisbane. Brisbane don't look great right now.
Sydney at the moment. Yeah.
Sydney at the moment, yeah, they could absolutely tear you to bits. But if you're able to put up these sorts of comebacks, even if you don't win the game, it's positive
Hmm.
signs. You don't have to try and win every game. You just have to be competitive. And that's exactly what I'm
Yeah. The
saying for
fact.
Richmond. That's what I'm saying for North. Saying for Essendon as they've gone through their injury woes. Even St Kilda and Melbourne. Like, as long as you're
Starting to
able...
say that about Port Adelaide.
Port Adelaide at the moment, yeah. As long as you're competitive, you're creating positive impacts and positive growth. Like you don't
Mm,
have to win every. Granted, wins are always nice. That's how you
yeah.
progress up the ladder, etc., etc. That factors your draft picks and all of that. That's a whole
And
entire
from what I
kettle of fish.
heard, like it wasn't just Murdoch. Like Devin Robinson had a fantastic game.
He did.
He was a
That
real
part I
grit
did
and
see.
grinder. 12 tackles. Willem Dersma, solid debut. Yeah, this was at 14 disposals, 5 tackles, 5 marks. Can't complain about that. And Josh Lindsay apparently did a little bit off halfback, sort of a 3-quarter game, but 16 disposals, and some apparently good use of the ball occasionally. So all first games for their team, all fairly solid.
It
So
was also
again, it's all about the positives.
exactly, and it was also my boy's 150th, Jack Graham's. It was the Fridge's 150th
Oh
game,
yeah,
and he also played very solidly too. So I cannot complain at all. I
yeah.
again, I'm very impressed with what I saw from the Eagles. So I think it's good to end out this round on a positive note. So we're gonna jump over now to the ladder, just to see where teams are sitting at the start of the season. So the top four, the top actually I'll go for the top six. Very interesting right now. Sydney at 1, Gold Coast at 2, Bulldogs at 3, and North Melbourne at 4. Insane already. Then we've
Bless
got
Port.
Then we've got the Crows at 5th, Hawthorn at 6th. That rounds out our top 6. Going into the wildcard positions, we've got Melbourne at 7th, Collingwood at 8th, Geelong at 9th, and the Giants at 10th. And then from then on, from 11th to 18th, it's Carlton, Richmond, Fremantle, St Kilda, Brisbane, Port Adelaide, Essendon, and the West Coast Eagles, with Carlton the only team in that list having won a game so far, obviously. So yeah, already very interesting signs to start off the season. Especially the North Melbourne
I
one.
think you can really tell.
That is the biggest one.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Bulldogs, Suns, and Swans have had great games. I think Bulldogs still the most comprehensive of those teams. To be fair, the Suns have also been equally as terrific.
Yes, I agree.
But yeah, as I said, I think the only thing we can really say is 0-2 for Brisbane. They have the bye this week. But as I said, they'll also be having to bring back players anyway. A couple will still be on suspension. Oh, actually, no, one.
It's only Harris Andrews.
Harris Andrews
suspension. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll get players back, but as I said, they've still got to hit their straps. Obviously they've faced 0-2 deficits, bad deficits, but as I said, it's still a fair whack to their percentage.
Mm-hmm.
It's not sub 60 like Port Essendon and West Coast, but it's only just above that.
The other very interesting thing about this, if you look at the percentages, North Melbourne has the third highest percentage in the league right now, off of one game.
Well, again, one game. Yeah, that's it. They were only playing.
They're high percentage than the Bulldogs, who have played 2. That's all I'm going to say.
I'd still take the Bulldogs' performances over North.
Yeah, but, so would I.
As I said,
so would I.
It's all about getting ahead of the ledger, and against West Coast next week, which we'll talk about soon. They've got a chance to do that.
Yeah. Speaking of, so let's jump over to the fixture for this upcoming week, and we're starting off with a Thursday night clash at the MCG. Hawthorn taking on Sydney.
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting one, because again, how do you judge Hawthorn? Because again, so good, but against the Bombers, whose midfield's pretty mediocre at the moment. Their midfield was clearly not up to snuff against GWS, and Sydney's midfield looks pretty fantastic. So it's I don't know. It's tough because I don't think Sydney's quite been as tested as we thought they were going to be. But as I said, it's really the matchup on the outside, and normally that's where you normally give it to Hawthorn, but I think Sydney's been fairly good. It's what the impact of Goulden being out the side is, and it's also too how's the defensive performance is going to be, because again, even though defense has been a premium, the Hawks can match up all tolls against Sydney. They've got a a lot of key back stocks, so you don't think that's going to be a problem. So really, it's going to be a very interesting and 50-50-ish match. It's hard to go against the Swans in form, but I don't think it's going to be as straightforward as that. But I think I'm still going to tip the Swans by a tiny bit. They've just been really good, and if the game's going to be this offensive, I think that edges a bit towards the Swans, who, as the only criticism we had to them being preseason was how was it going to organize offense. But honestly, offensive production doesn't seem just that hard to come by this year. So, yeah, that probably takes away from Hawthorn and just adds to Sydney. I'm probably going to be a bit more tentative on Hawks tips until maybe round 5 and 6, and you have a bit more clearer idea of the type of season that's going to be.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards Sydney on this one as well. I think they've just, even with the loss of Goulden, I think they've just shown a lot more in the past 2 games. I think what they've been building early on is really, really positive. The way they've brought in Kerno and Malcolm Roses Jr. and actually been able to work around them as they properly assimilate into the system has been really, really solid. And I'm just overall, I'm a lot more impressed with just how Sydney's been able to restructure and just look so much better because of it.
And are we going to see the most... no one will talk about it except on the Coast to Coast podcast, but Jai Sarong versus Massimo D'Ambrosio. one of the more defensive wingers we've. I mean, I don't actually know. I've never seen him. I have not paid enough attention to
Defensive winger
Drycer
versus
on the wing,
offensive
but
winger. That definitely could be
yeah,
a
as I
very
said, that
interesting
could be
matchup.
like, yeah, as I said, it'll be interesting to see because again, like, Hawthorn have a lot of offense that comes from their outside wings, but like, it's very small sample size. But Sydney have shown signs of being able to shut that down a bit, so.
Mm-hmm.
It will be a question of will Sydney take the biggest positives away from Hawthorn, which I think they might be able to.
I think they're going to be able
Again, I
to.
think this game will be close, but I'm definitely thinking Sydney have more avenues to win.
Yeah, I agree. I'm definitely going to go Sydney on this one, I think. But let's jump over now to a Friday night clash, and this one is going to be an absolute banger of a game. Over at the Adelaide Oval, it's the Crows and the Bulldogs.
Yeah, and it's just like it's so hard to tip against the Bulldogs because of how well they've been. Their forward line's been absolutely fantastic. Their midfield's been fantastic, but it's I think Adelaide might do it. Like their tall forward line should present a lot of troubles. I think that's probably the best forward line the Bulldogs are going to go up against at the moment. I know that obviously the GWS forward line can be dangerous, but I don't think in terms of like stretching their worst defenders. I don't think the Giants do that as much as Adelaide's able to. I think Adelaide historically have never relied too much on the clearances. So I don't think that the Bulldogs having that dominance is going to matter as much. And the Bulldogs still turn the ball over a bit. And Adelaide tend to rebound fairly well. So as I said, I do think it's going to be a very back and forth game, but I think there's going to be a stretch where Bulldogs might get a bit frustrated, maybe lose like 5 goals in a row and then just like slowly having to play catch up against Adelaide. Because, I do think that Adelaide might actually have this set up from the Western Bulldogs, but that's only a hunch because I've only seen them play once. So
Yeah, we only have a
it's very hard to
small
say, but
we only have a small sample size as to how these teams will match up this year. Based on previous track records, it's definitely going to be probably either it's going to be a high scoring game or it's going to be a midfield defensive game. It's the way that I could see this kind of playing out because, like, actually, Adelaide will get Rankin back this week.
yeah.
So, does his X factor play a big role, or is he just going to be like slowly assimilated into the system again?
I will be amazed if Adelaide win the clearance count against them, but it's all about like what they're able to do from those stoppages and centre bounces. And really for them, it's about preventing that first possession from being damaging on the Western Bulldogs side. Because again, Bulldogs racking up 45 clearances to Adelaide's 29, despite both of them having fairly comfortable wins. One's clearly a team. And we saw last year that Adelaide aren't really a clearance team. They're all about the shape away from the ball. So if Adelaide are able to stay disciplined, we should see the Western Bulldogs be a bit nullified in that. I think it's hard for Western Bulldogs to get that pure bully style, which we saw take away from them last year. Which saw them struggle against, a few teams last year. But as I said, like, it's weird how confident I am tipping Adelaide, despite me not thinking this game's much more than a 55-45 style of game.
Yeah, it's, I think it's going to be very, very close to determine a winner on this one. I can't remember off the top of my head what the Bulldogs track record is on Adelaide Oval itself. But I know against the Crows, like it's always been, especially since the Crows have gotten a lot better, it's always been a very, very close game. So I don't know where I'm leaning. I'm probably going to go Dogs just because I'm more impressed with what I've seen of them so far. But I won't be surprised if the Crows win this out either. Like, it's genuinely a coin flip game, just based on what we've seen.
Yeah. Now, should we head to a more one-sided coin, a bit heavier?
Yes, and unlike last year,
tails.
where these two teams faced off at Marvel Stadium and Richmond managed to completely surprise everyone by beating the Gold Coast Suns. I do think the Suns are going to win this one out on the MCG a little bit more outright. All I'm hoping from this one is just again more competitiveness. I want to see more out of our younger players. I'd like to see Luke Trainer come back in. Or actually, we might see Liam Fawcett in if Jonty Fowler's out, or we'll see Jasper Older.
Yeah.
We'll see one of our younger tools come back in for that. I actually would love to see Trainer come back in on a defensive kind of role. Not that there is anyone in our defense that I'd like to take out. I think everyone played really well, but just maybe, I don't know. There's got to be someone in there that could maybe fit him in. I'm not entirely sure who. I don't think we have any injuries out of this game or anything like that. So, but I just missed. I think what Train provided for us last year was a really, really good first season for him. So I'd love to see more of that. But yeah, just like Sam Grill. I didn't really get to talk about this when we touched on Thursday night's game, but Sam Grill, what an incredible first game from him. Like he stood out so much, and there's a reason why we picked him up, and that is exactly why. His speed, his ability to break tackles, like his clearance work is fantastic already. Like I love that we grabbed him because I already knew he was going to be such a talent from watching him in the VFL. So I'm really glad we got that. And I'm definitely excited to see that against the Suns. However, the Gold Coast Suns are a lot more talented in terms of midfield defense work. They're a lot more talented in terms of their forward work and their backline work in general. They're so much more well-rounded as a team. They're very much an elite team, obviously. So I very much think that they're just going to win this outright. But I do hope that we play this fairly competitively, similar to what the Eagles did, except not as much of a blowout.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I reckon this game might be a bit more of a blowout, but you probably want to be a bit more even than the Eagles game. You'd rather it being like a slow burn blowout than a really terrible first half.
Yeah, I'd like to actually be like a 4-quarter game rather than like a half game.
Yeah, but I will say, I think, because he said a lot, I do think like Richmond, I think their outside game, I don't think Gold Coast has been really tested on the outside this year yet. So I think, they might be able to set that up. And yeah, as I said, just scoring as much as possible when they have the opportunities. I don't think they're going to be able to stop too much of the Suns midfield. I think they're just too talented. But, as I said, maybe because, if they're from stoppages, you might have a bit of chance for Richmond to stop on the set play. We do know that Richmond defend a lot better off stoppages than turnovers. But yeah, as I said, it's there's not too many avenues to think Richmond will be even remotely close in this game. But they're versing the Suns, who are hot property at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Now onto a game that has very interesting stakes to it, because it's the Giants and St Kilda at NG Stadium, and St Kilda coming into this 0-2, Giants also coming into this 0-2.
1-1.
Sorry, 1-1. My mistake. But after St Kilda, close losses, have been able to put on some fantastic performances despite that. And the Giants just look absolutely woeful. It's
lopsided.
Yeah, but
they were very impressive against Hawthorn. They were so awful against the Bulldogs.
They were dreadful against the Bulldogs. What does this game offer the Giants in a positive sense? Like, what are the areas that they are better at it than St Kilda coming into this matchup that will really kind of make or break this game for them?
I think, first of all, I don't think that there's that much separating these two teams. I think, first of all, Saints just have a pretty mediocre forward line. So, it's going to be hard to get past the Giants'
They've always
back
had
line.
a mediocre forward line.
Yeah, but, when you have to be a lot more defensively accountable against a player like Sam Darcy, Aaron Norton, it's harder to take those aggressive intercepts. It's harder to get their lethal halfbacks involved. So really, I actually think it's up to the Saints to stop the GWS outside movement And I think they've got to take advantage of GWS's weakened midfield unit on the inside. I do think they have the capabilities of that. Kieran Briggs has like not had the best start to the season. It's fair to say. So in fact, Jake Riccardi took a lot more ruck contest than is probably expected at this point. So yeah, I do think that the Saints have to set up their game in the middle. Again, keep that creativity out on the outside. Still get those burst plays because while I do think GWS should be able to reformat a bit, get a bit more defensive lockdown on the wings. I think St Kilda will get a few more players, but I think this might be the game that, with all the high scoring, I think this one will go back lower. I know it's controversial saying that after, GWS was just like putrid defensively last week, but I just think the way these two teams match up, I think they'll both be looking to stop the outside movement, which will turn into a nil-all draw. It's just like whether the Giants can get some good back half movement versus whether the Saints can get some territory from the middle. It's really just a war of attrition based off weaknesses, and I don't think there's too much between these two teams, but I got a feeling the Giants might send their Saints 0-2. Like, I know they were disappointing last week, but I do think you got to give the Giants a bit of some small credits. As I said, I do think some of the younger players are still playing all right. I think obviously some of the big performers had a huge drop off last week. Stringer, Himmelberg, even Cornelio compared to his first week, Hogan. But, as I said, there are some players that are playing some all right football. Harvey Thomas has looked good both weeks. Laverde still did some solid things in both matches, even if he did make a few errors playing fullback. And Joe Fonte, still absolutely fantastic. So, yeah, as I said, I don't think this is going to be as simple as the Saints getting their first win. I think they're still going to have to really, really work for it. And yeah, maybe it's a bit contrarian to me, despite me singing the St Kilda praises. I think I'm still going to tip GWS at NG.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards that as well, actually. Like, when you really think about it, like, Giants, like, when their defense is on, like, they'll match up really, really well against St Kilda, just in general. I think I think both midfields are kind of sitting at about the same right now, although I think the fact that Finn Callahan and Clayton Oliver, even if they didn't have great games last week, they had fantastic games the week before. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. Callahan was still good last week. 2 goals, 27 possessions.
Oh, yeah, there you go. That's still a fantastic performance. And then, yeah, it's like St Kilda's defense, whilst I think it's not too bad, even though they've lost a fair bit, I think the Giants' forward line just matches up against that a lot better. And I don't think it's going to be a backline that'll not necessarily survive, but like that'll kind of falter a little bit more against the Giants' destruction.
I still think you got to give St Kilda like a bit of credit. Like, as I said, like they still were defensively pretty solid against Collingwood. I know Melbourne scored 120 points, and it's not exactly the team that you want to be seeing, considering what we thought preseason score. What is it? 30 set shots against you. It's 30 scoring shots against you, I should say. But there was a couple of really solid efforts that led to that. I think the Saints can learn from that, but yeah, I just think there's going to be a period where, as I said, seen in most games, that a team's going to go on a run, and I think GWS is just like a lot more likely to. You can't really expect Maxwell to kick 4 goals again, or Malira to just be. Well, if the Saints are going to like dominate from the midfield, Naz has to be in there, and that's going to make him less likely to score goals.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, if he's playing up forward, then I think the Saints are less likely to dominate from stoppages, which is where they could be really solid in this contest. So, yeah, as I said, just a couple of reasons why I think GWS is actually my tip this week.
Yeah, I think I'll follow suit on that one. But jumping over now to the West, The first West game of the season, might I add, because there was not one last week. Fremantle and the Demons. And honestly, this genuinely could be an excellent game because I think Melbourne, again, looked fantastic against St Kilda. Freo looked fantastic against Geelong, even if that game was a 10-point loss. They're both teams really on a pretty solid trajectory right now. Obviously, Freo has some very minor issues that they need to touch on this week that they kind of faltered with against Geelong. Melbourne in a very fantastic position. They had some very excellent performances all around the ground. So I think this is just going to be one of the better matchups of the round.
Yeah, and there's like weird recent history against them too. Obviously, a couple of years ago when Melbourne were looking solid, Fremantle absolutely spanked them a couple of times in a row. Then had another very solid win last year. And it's like, oh, Freo have got the wood over Melbourne. And then Melbourne get a surprise win at the end of last year to almost derail Freo's season. So, it's been weird, the history between these two. But in terms of like pure matchups, it's going to be very interesting because, again, we know how much Melbourne's backline's changed. Obviously, with the loss of Stephen May, more by their own choice. Jake Lever was just okay as a spare, relying on Howes and Disco Turner. It's going to be a big ask to stop all the tall forwards of Fremantle, and they did it last year. Like, to be fair, and like with a lot worse defensive half.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they were battered when they won against Freo. It's like, shouldn't be understated how much of a surprise win that was. But yeah, as I said, it's going to be interesting. I think, Fremantle in the midfield should look a bit better coming into Melbourne as opposed to Geelong, who eventually sort of got back into the contest a bit more. Obviously Fremantle won the clearances, but weren't able to get that much from them capitalizing that into score. I think they've got more avenues to do that against Melbourne. But again, Jackson versus Gawn, like what a matchup that's going to be. Because we know that Gawn can run defensively, so we might see him stick around Jackson a bit more than just the centre bounces. We might see defensive Gawn be unleashed. And if that can happen, Freo scoring might dry up, and that might allow for avenues where Melbourne can get in ahead. But I don't know. I still think that Fremantle almost have to win, like, to be a contender. Like, you can't just like closely lose to Geelong and then stuff up against Melbourne. But who knows? Like, as I said, I got the sneaky suspicion that Melbourne might be like a half competent team this year at the same time.
Like I said, like they're in a very unique position where they could finally contend back for a finals position for like pretty much the first time since 2021. Like it's again small sample size, but it's really, really interesting in the position that they're already starting to put themselves in. But in terms of against this matchup against Freo, if you allow Max Gawn to again fill in those defensive positions that he's known to do, he's very much a defensive minded player, a lot more than an offensive minded player. Like he's able to turn the tide of a game in an instant. He's got one of those special kinds of skills. But in terms of like the way Freo kind of match up, it's gonna be a lot harder to quell both their rocks. Depending on if Sean Darcy does play, because I know there's a little bit of hesitancy now after seeing last week's game. And how you stop those three tall forwards. If Max Gawn is able to do the things that he does, I think Melbourne win this out. But if Freo find a way to be able to quell his impact and his influence, I think they win that out. I think that's what's going to be probably the bigger defining factor.
Yeah, I don't know. I still think there's just a way for Freo to win straight from the midfield because again, like it's a bit more of a step up the Freo's midfield compared to the Saints, and I do think it's a chance for a few players to lift up a bit, and it's also about quelling those small, deadlier players on ground level. Like Isaiah Dudley was absolutely fantastic last week. Murphy Reed, although inaccurate, was getting involved in a lot of plays. And Shai Bolton's still connecting up. So again, it's I don't know. There's a lot more evenness to Freo, but I do think Melbourne's going to give this a red hot crack. I'll tip Freo all the same though.
I'm I don't know. I'm on the fence for this one at the moment. I'll probably end up going Freo. Just I think it's a little bit more of like I guess a comfort pick in this situation. Like it feels more comfortable to tip them. But I kind of want to see how like what team sheets kind of look like for this game. I think at the end of the day.
Fair enough.
All right, let's jump over to Sunday's games now. I get with probably the two sadder games of the round happening both on the same day.
Yeah.
Port Adelaide.
They're even, at least.
Yeah, that's true. Port Adelaide hosting the Bombers at Adelaide Oval.
Yeah, well, as I said, it's really which team can capitalize the most on offense because like both defenses really didn't show much last week. But in Essendon's credit, at least they were offensively efficient, and that might spell a bit of danger for Port Adelaide. But I do think around the ground that Port Adelaide were decently even in terms of like statistics. They were just like again turning the ball over. There was a few concerns as well from basically forward line conversion, but yeah, I mean Essendon beat them last year, and that was probably a better Port side, and that was probably a worse Essendon side. So yeah, it's really hard to tell. There's really not much you can say about this from the small sample size and how both teams were fairly manhandled in the contest. Essendon showed much, but I still think I'll tip Port, but I'm pretty biased there.
Yeah, I know
if you wanted, if you're like tipping a gauntlet, might be a good time to tip Essendon.
Yeah, honestly, if they're gonna try and get one of those like sneaky few wins, that they've kind of been shown to possibly get because they actually play quite spirited. Like generally they could sneak one here against Port very early on.
Yeah,
I do kind of expect Port to bounce back this week. I feel like, especially at Adelaide Oval, it's a lot more of a comfortable environment for them. Essendon, I don't think they have a great track record at AO just in general. Like not taking out last year, but like even going back to early, like to 2022, I guess. Like I don't think they have a track record there like at all.
Yeah, last year was MCG. Sorry.
So I don't really know how I feel about the Bombers in that situation. But I do think that they do have a lot of upside right now. Even if their defense, with Mackay especially, just isn't great. I think they're around the ground. There are steady improvements. The fact that like there seems to be not too much ill will towards Merritt in regards to the off-season drama. We didn't really touch on that earlier, but there is that factor as well.
Excuse the pun, but like, if you were going to give a team based off merit in the first week, you would definitely give it to Essendon. I think not only did they have the literal merit, but they had a lot more.
I do want to say though,
reasonable level of performances.
I think for kind of stepping into like the captain's shoes, I think McGrath did very well last week.
Yeah.
Like you could really tell that there was a different kind of energy in regards to like his leadership qualities going up, and I definitely think a change of leadership probably did help them it's going to help them long term. And it again, we touched on this in the offseason. It takes stress off of Merritt's shoulders, even despite him trying to get to Hawthorn, etc., etc. Like being able him to just focus on playing his style of game and not have to worry too much about being like the captain does provide a lot more freedom to a player, and we've seen that happen across multiple years with other captains as well. So I hope that Essendon do actually make this a really good game. I hope Port make this a really good game. And you know what? Screw it. I'm going to tip the Bombers on this one.
Honestly, don't blame you that much.
I want to see how this one plays out. All right, jumping over now to the last game of the round. The West Coast Eagles taking on North Melbourne, also at Optus. Lucky for Optus, they get 2 games this week. Normally they only get 1, but they get 2 because they missed out last week. So
And we get an early spin ball, maybe.
yeah, I don't know. Going off of
I don't
technically,
know. I
North
don't
are
know,
currently
yeah.
technically sitting 4th. This is not a spoon ball in any
Yeah,
sense,
exactly.
technically.
Yeah, you can't go spin
If
ball this
anything,
early,
Port
but I just
Adelaide
thought I'd
Essendon are
throw
the
that
spoon
in there.
bowl.
Yeah. Well, as I said, spin ball Sunday. Lock it in.
Spoon Bowl Sunday.
They should have that on
I
lockdown.
love that actually. But yes, this
Yeah.
could genuinely be a really interesting clash. Again, like the Eagles are
Yeah,
in a steady
honestly.
improvement. Going off of
Yeah.
that game against the Suns. North Melbourne, again, fantastic win against Port Adelaide. No one was expecting it. But will they continue that energy and continue that growth going into this game? There's a fair chance they will. There is a very, very solid chance of them winning out against this game. As if what we've seen so far is enough to go by. But I really hope that this is close, because I think both teams deserve really like to watch a really, really fun game.
Yeah, it's one of those things with North Melbourne, and again, we talked about them in terms of the grand scheme of things. Again, I still think they have to get 8 or 9 wins this season. Like, they just can't have another really cellar dweller performance, so they have to win this. But I don't think you can just easily walk over the Eagles at this point of the season at home. I do think that there's signs of a decent-ish team, but yeah, again, I think it's going to be hard for Eagles to quell that North Melbourne midfield, which again is their strongest attribute. So there's no real logical reason to tip the Eagles, except for the fact that, I think it might be a bit closer. I just think there's one quarter where North's going to blow them a bit out the water. But yeah, as I said, I would like for the Eagles to really hunt to try and just secure a win for the year.
Yeah, I think I do think North will end up winning out fairly convincingly. But if the Eagles are gonna get that at minimum 1 win this season, I could very much see it happening here. Like, I would not be surprised if it does happen here. But yeah, I'm gonna tip North, I think, comfortably on that one. Just because it's probably the safer bet. And then in terms of the rest of the teams, we've got one of the many bye rounds to come due to obviously opening round. So Brisbane Lions, Collingwood, Carlton, and Geelong all have byes this week. And is there any other final thoughts we need to add before we start winding down?
Not really. Is the new player medal come out yet?
Oh, Rising Star?
What do you call it? Rising Star.
I actually haven't had a look yet. Let me take a very quick look. Yes. Do you want to take a guess at who got it?
I've totally forgotten. It wasn't the No, he's too old, isn't he? The Eagles player.
Yeah, he's too old. I'll give you one guess.
Grilge?
No, it wasn't Sam Grill, sadly. But it was from the same game. It was Jagger Smith.
Fair enough.
So yes, he has won the Rising Star nomination for round 1, 32 touches, 11 score involvements, 3 clearances from 73% game time.
I forgot he didn't win it the first week.
No, he didn't win it the first week. Just for note, just to cover last week's as well, Leo Lombard won the opening round Rising Star nomination.
Oh, that's right. Solid game.
He did have a very solid game.
Not undeserved.
No, and yeah, credit to Jagger Smith as well. Again, fantastic game. 5 tackles as well was also very solid. Again, fantastic game from him. Carlton, he definitely has a bright future. Whether it's at Carlton long term, don't know, but he's going to be a fantastic player going forward.
Trying to trade him up already.
Hey, I'll take him. I wouldn't mind another midfielder. I'll take him. Yeah. Any other final thoughts?
Nah, as I said, I think, again, it's been weird. I've got to get back into dissecting football because, as I said, I think as a neutral viewer, I've sort of been sucked out of it a tiny bit. But there's definitely a lot of intrigue into where teams are going. Because, as I said, it's just been such a weird, high-scoring, and yet so I wouldn't say lackluster, but definitely defensive efforts are harder to pinpoint. And it's going to be interesting to see if that evolves further or whether teams find a way to lock down defense. So again, maybe boring for like only a person like me will be like, oh, we need to bring more defensive football to the AFL. But yeah, as I said, it's going to be interesting. How about you? What are you looking forward to as things clear up?
I'm hoping I get a little bit more free time this week to actually watch some games. Um,
Yeah.
because I'm working night shifts again. I'm normally asleep in the evenings when a lot of these games are on, so I don't get to watch much of the games, and I only have to really go off of highlights and obviously statistics to kind of get my knowledge in for what I need to know. But I really hope I'm able to watch some of the Saturday games, especially the Richmond game, of course. I haven't gotten to see my boys live. I am likely missing this game live for a thing I can't actually publicly announce because I can't. There are certain people that are not allowed to know what I'm up to this week. But I really hope I get to watch that game because I didn't really get to see much of Carlton Richmond live. So it'll be good to see that. I definitely want to see Freo and Melbourne if I get a chance to watch that because I think that'll be a really good game to watch. And yeah, just overall, I just want to try and get back into watching more games. If I'm able to kind of adjust my sleep schedule slightly because I miss watching footy.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, Match Review came back for Sunday games, and it
I
was
did
only
see that. I
Teddy
forgot to mention it, but I kind
that
of
got hit with a fine,
yeah.
1,500. Careless contact with an umpire.
Tisk tisk.
Oh, you won't be tickled pink about that, Blazy.
Tisk
Oh,
tisk.
tisk.
But yes,
All right.
that does bring us to the end of episode 97. Thank you all so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, and just coming to hang out with us this week. We slightly apologize for it being a 2.5 hour long episode, but we had a fair amount to cover because we missed out on last week as well. But also, footy's back. We're still trying to figure out like a proper succinct way to do all of our notes. I think this week was actually fairly decent, but we want to try and at least get a little bit more information out there. Whether it's more on individuals, whether it's just kind of overall kind of statistics. I think I'm pretty happy with how this week went. So we'll see how we go for the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll come to a very solid conclusion on our side of things. For your side of things, we hope you all enjoyed. If you only watch the episode for your specific team, I hope you got some good information out of us for that. Next week will be very, very interesting. All episodes from now on should be again out on Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Australian Eastern, the daylight time. That'll also be 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time when daylight savings rolls over. So that won't change when that happens. Currently, it's like 10 p.m. Perth time, I think. But 10 a.m. Perth time. That'll go into 11 a.m. Once daylight savings is over, which will be good. But yeah, footy's back, and we're very happy about it. I'm very happy about it. So yes, thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll see you all next week for maybe not as long of an episode, but definitely a much more interesting episode to talk about as well. So until then, we'll love you all and leave you all, and take care.